Does the Black Moon howl? No, not yet. See the boy. He was born in a time before names. There weren't enough humans around to need them back then. He was one of a handful occupying a coastal village, using a tongue long since dead. They eked out a simple life, hunting, gathering, fishing. The only thing on most of their minds was surviving to see the next sunrise. Yes, a simple life, free of complications. Until the hermit appeared. The boy would remember this man for eternity. Haggard and thin, skin weathered by time and pain. A man that, emaciated, walking with a long, gnarled cane that honestly looked healthier than he did, shouldn't be alive. Even the boy, who had scarcely seen beyond the bounds of his village, knew that the hermit was unnatural, an aberration, an anomaly. He walked into the center of the village, sat down on a large stone, and waited. Nobody dared ask his business, nor what the hermit waited for. Then, a few days later, the Black Moon howled. The boy saw the village's youngest hunter freeze one evening while out on a walk. Not simply stand still, but freeze. Then, for an instant, he became solid black, a coal statue, and as soon as he'd changed, he was gone. Obliterated, not a trace of him remained. Such is the power of the Black Moon. It can make any conscious being disappear in an instant, turn black, then wiped from our plane of existence, never to be seen again. Its choice of victims seemed at each instance to be utterly random, but it would come for all who lived eventually. This is known to some as the howling of the Black Moon. Later that same night, the boy found himself talking to the hermit, who asked with small, frantic eyes what he had seen. When the boy told him, he let out a deep, rattling sigh. The boy, curious, asked him if he knew about the nightmare he'd just witnessed. The hermit looked up. He'd been the first one in the hermit's millennia of pursuit that had ever asked. In that moment, he knew that he had found his successor in the hunt for the death of ages. The hermit told the boy it went by many names. The Great Finale, the Pale King, but most common of all was the Black Moon. The entity existed beyond the veil of our reality, a creature of pure energy, though nobody could really be sure of its true nature. The hermit had been tracking it, learning about it, and trying to destroy it for thousands of years. And yet it only took him 4 pathetic minutes to tell the boy everything he knew. The boy, knowing still that something about the hermit was unnatural, asked how he came to be in this position. The hermit told the boy he was the counterbalance, a kind of chosen one, destined to face and perhaps even defeat the Black Moon someday. The counterbalance receives a number of truly extraordinary gifts for inheriting the responsibility: eternal life, eternal youth, near physical immortality. But they will be haunted by their purpose, doomed to watch everyone they love die around them, as they continue to hunt their only true equal and opposite, the Black Moon itself. The hermit in his own eyes had failed at his duty. He had grown weary, and now he needed to pass the duty of counterbalance on to another. That other would be the boy. He felt a sudden and profound change, along with the knowledge that nothing would ever be the same again. He was no longer just the boy. Now, he was the counterbalance. He watched the hermit give him a slight nod of respect and then crumble into dust before his eyes. The boy, the counterbalance, looked up at the sky and saw the stars twinkling, so bright and so beautiful. Little did he know his battle with the Black Moon would outlast every single one of them. Does the Black Moon howl? Not without blood. The boy grew into a man as his village aged and then died around him. Decades passed, then centuries, then millennia. Tens of thousands of years watching humanity develop and grow around him as he continued his pursuit of that one elusive foe. As science and diagnostic technology gained ground, absorbing and then evolving beyond all the old superstitions, the counterbalance gained a better understanding of the Black Moon, though even then, it still remained essentially a stranger. The entity was entropic, a being of pure randomness and chaos without consistent form. It didn't exist in our universe, but it could exercise its influence here with so-called obliteration events, much like the horrible fate that befell the young hunter from the village. But that was only the proverbial tip of the iceberg. The counterbalance tracked and noted obliteration events. They were exceedingly rare at first, something that occurred once every 1,000 years or so, like a terrible curse. But he couldn't help but notice a concerning trend emerging. It started happening once a century, then once a decade. He could feel the terrible future stretching out in front of him. How, over their shared eternity, the Black Moon would gain more and more ground. Would there come a day where it took someone once a year, once a month, a week, a day, an hour, a minute, a second? It'd spell the end of all conscious life, a total victory for the Black Moon, the end of the universe, the death of ages, a complete existential obliteration. He was swept up in a sobering realization. He couldn't win this fight alone. However, while his hunt for the Black Moon had been largely fruitless, the counterbalance had discovered many other things along the way. Strange creatures, objects with extraordinary powers, and events that couldn't be explained with rational science. Perhaps something about these oddities, these anomalies, would hold the key to defeating his timeless enemy. And it hadn't just been these objects, entities, and events. He'd also discovered some truly exceptional people on his travels, minds and skills that rivaled even his own, despite his age. Perhaps they would be the ones to help him win. With the 13 most brilliant and trusted people the counterbalance ever met, he decided to form a council. And from this council, they forged and directed an organization dedicated to understanding and counteracting the strange in all its forms, with the secret hope that their search into darkness would yield the answer to the Black Moon's downfall. He called it the SCP Foundation. They would secure the anomalous, contain it, and protect all of humanity from its influence. The counterbalance also took on a new title, befitting of his new role, the Administrator. And even the Black Moon itself was given a moniker, in hopes of robbing it of some of its frightening power. SCP-001. Does the Black Moon howl? Only at the blind. The year was now 1987. The SCP Foundation had been operating for over a century, and thanks to their secret possession of anomalous wisdom and technology, their own advancement was thousands of years ahead of the rest of humanity. While there still wasn't a silver bullet solution to the Black Moon, and its deadly howls were becoming all the more frequent as the decades went on, the Foundation did have some irons in the fire to combat it. Their ability to gather intel on both the entity itself and its obliteration events had improved considerably, thanks to their new global information network. Their top minds were also working on a highly classified device known as the Singular Conceptual Bunker, which may one day come in handy for combating the extra-dimensional entity directly. But the most valuable piece of information they ever gathered about the Black Moon was this: it couldn't howl when it was being watched. The very act of engaged observation defanged it. The problem is, how can you observe something that doesn't technically exist inside your own reality? In order to pull this off, the Foundation would need to get extremely creative. Thankfully, creative solutions to strange problems are the Foundation's specialty. Flash forward to 1993. Enter Dr. Moto, a brilliant young scientist and conceptual engineer working for the SCP Foundation. With the administrator's consultation, he started the Key Project, an arm of the wider Project Oromasdes, the umbrella initiative for using modified anomalous objects in the battle against the Black Moon. The goal of the Key Project was relatively simple. If people couldn't observe the Black Moon directly, then the Foundation could make proxies of the Black Moon that could be observed, almost like a kind of voodoo doll. These new anomalies would only need to satisfy 3 criteria: the inability to operate when being observed, a hostility to conscious life, and the ability to end conscious life of their own volition when not being observed. Through conceptual engineering, a link theoretically could be forged between these objects and the Black Moon. allowing observation of them to stop the obliteration events. However, despite being a good idea in theory, Dr. Moto's efforts were marred with errors and tragedies. One object wasn't deadly enough, simply appearing behind people in a threatening pose when they weren't looking. Another one killed purely through collateral damage, a giant sculpture of a human head that immediately attempted escape by barging through Site-01, the Center for Anti-Black Moon Operations, and killing 19 people in the process. Another one of Moto's objects, a huge black sphere, simply immediately exploded, killing 12 people. And in the most horrific misstep of all, one of Moto's objects caused a mass death event in a nearby hotel, where 142 people were spontaneously incinerated when the object, a series of interlocking stalactites and stalagmites, were left unobserved for 0.2 seconds. Almost all of Moto's objects were terminated in the aftermath, either being too useless or too dangerous to keep around. The young scientist felt a deep shame, but forged on. He made one truly brilliant creation that satisfied all the criteria: a sculpture, incapable of moving while being watched, but would snap the neck of the nearest conscious entity if it left unobserved for even a fraction of a second. Its relatively minimal killing left it easy to contain without causing mass deaths, and despite all of the other deaths that had sadly occurred during the key project, Dr. Moto believed that the lives saved in the long run by stopping the Black Moon's howls would justify the sacrifice. The problem is, the key project didn't stop anything. Not long after this, there was the first recorded double obliteration event in Rome, where a young tourist couple had both been obliterated simultaneously. All the deaths in the key project had been for nothing. The Black Moon was only getting more powerful. The shame and the guilt was too much for Dr. Moto. He left a note in his office reading, "We've been looking at nothing. I'm sorry, Administrator. I failed you, sir." Moto's corpse was later found in the sculpture's temporary containment chamber. His neck snapped. The key project was, in summary, shut down, and its one surviving creation transported to Site-19 in late 1993, where it was designated as SCP-173. Another painful failure for the Administrator. Back to the drawing board once more. Does the Black Moon howl? Not while the stars shine. Millennia stretched on. Almost everyone died except the Administrator, thanks to his gift, or perhaps curse, as the counterbalance to the Black Moon. Science marched on. The SCP Foundation marched on. But all this progress, all this power, was nothing against the incomprehensible influence of SCP-001. The Black Moon was howling more frequently than ever, all the way up to the year 3156, when the Foundation launched the SEEK project under the support of Project Oromastes. As more and more people were wiped out in frequent obliteration events, the Administrator became painfully aware that perhaps the answers to the Black Moon problem wouldn't be found on Earth. Using state-of-the-art technology, with a little help from the anomalous, the SCP Foundation began work on an autonomous spacefaring vessel that could search the stars for the key to the Black Moon's destruction. It was an awe-inspiring creation, a huge craft powered by artificial intelligence with a universal translator, cryogenic units, and hundreds of autonomous drones to perform more targeted searches. SEEK was waved off into the unforgiving depths of space. The Administrator could only hope that it would come back with worthwhile answers. The first of the three notable planets SEEK arrived on was one theoretically capable of supporting human life, except for its brutal and constant blizzards and snowstorms. When SEEK's drones were deployed, they did discover signs of civilization based around sentient spherical creatures, but no signs of actual life remained. Records and statues found across the planet seemed to indicate that the Black Moon was responsible for the destruction of the planet's civilization, causing so many obliteration events that the remaining survivors went mad from the fear and stress, leading to mass death in the ensuing chaos. The next planet was discovered centuries later, in the year 3499. While this planet could also theoretically support human life, it suffered from frequent volcanic eruptions that rendered much of its surface a flaming mess. However, there were still the dormant ruins of a once advanced civilization of conscious beings. Much like the prior planet, they'd been driven extinct by Black Moon obliteration events a century before the SEEK even arrived. Unlike the last planet, however, it seems that they accepted their fate and went gently into the night. The planet was now overrun by billions of armored bat-like creatures that operated on pure instinct, and thus were not considered conscious enough to be obliterated. The final planet was reached in 3764, and was the most fruitful of the 3 discoveries. This planet was hyper-advanced, fully urbanized, and covered in sprawling megacities, with records and technology over 1,000 years ahead of Earth. Before the Black Moon killed almost all of them, there were a species of humanoid telepathic fungi, and had developed an awareness of the Black Moon's existence that was on par with that of humanity's. They even had their own equivalent of the SCP Foundation actively working on countermeasures. And most amazingly of all, Seek found one surviving member of this species on the planet, cryogenically frozen. The craft was immediately instructed to collect the survivor and return home for interrogation. The administrator was preparing for what could be the most important conversation since he met the Hermit all those thousands of years ago. Does the Black Moon howl? Only when waning. When the surviving creature, codenamed Sage, was returned to Earth, the administrator was eager to finally speak with it. Like the rest of its now extinct species, Sage spoke through powerful telepathic mind waves, which only the administrator, thanks to his counterbalance abilities, was able to receive at close range without being harmed. Incidentally, it wasn't long until the very fact of the administrator's nature as a counterbalance came up in the mental conversation. Sage could tell, just by being in his presence. They discovered a number of vital truths over their brief time communicating. That Sage's survival had been pure luck, for starters. The Black Moon is still very much capable of obliterating conscious beings in an unconscious state. The administrator also learned that he was merely the latest in an extremely long line of counterbalances across time, space, and species. Though everyone but him had waived this duty, passed it on. Sage had one question to ask the administrator in turn. What is SCP? The singular conceptual bunker being worked on and perfected for thousands of years by now by the Foundation's top scientists and conceptual engineers. The administrator replied, "Victory, but it will take a very, very long time. Specifically, so long that he would see the stars go out around him, one by one." Shocked, Sage asked him what good victory would do him then. Rather than say it aloud, he replied with a thought. Sage paused and said, "I see. How blasphemous of you. Hopefully it works." After this, the administrator proceeded to the singular conceptual bunker and entered it, leaving instructions for the Foundation to be run by a newly formed O5 Council in his indefinite absence. Thousands of years later, in the year 5011, Sage spoke one more time, repeating the words, "Hopefully, hopefully," before turning solid black and disappearing. The Black Moon had claimed one more victim, but billions more had gone in the interim. The administrator had no more answers to give. At least, no more answers that anyone but him would understand. He was inside the singular conceptual bunker now, loaded into a device known as Tome, an experimental memorial module meant to pick up and record all the last messages of every dying civilization across the universe when the time finally came. All he could do was wait, and wait was exactly what we did. Does the Black Moon howl? Yes. Yes, it does. Years pass, too many to count. It's a time after names now, and Tome sits in the very center drinking in the end of the universe. The last of all the human colonies across the universe were obliterated by the Black Moon back in the year 7329. So long ago. But some of the final messages of fear, panic, and distress still echoed around in the administrator's mind. "Hello? Is there anyone here? We require assistance. It's taking people every day. We need help. There's barely anyone left. We need help. Hello? Hello? Cabal 0943, we have abandoned the false flesh. We have abandoned the false flesh. The shepherd's crook broken neath my knee. Cabal 0943, Cabal 0943, forgive us! Forgive us! We're going to leave this on. It's so dark outside now. It's blotted out the sun. I have to go now.
Respond. First convenience. Emergency. Situation developing. Require additional resources.
My fault, your fault, our fault, my fault, your fault, our fault, my fault, your fault, our fault! Rip my brain out now, rip my brain out now! and a small child, the last on Earth, simply asking, "Hello?" into an indifferent microphone. But the administrator had to wait, as the singular conceptual bunker became the solitary conceptual bunker. He was the last conscious being in the universe, and still he needed to wait as the stars went dark outside. Only when there was nothing outside but black was it finally time for the counterbalance's long game to play off. There was nothing left of our universe. The only thing here was the SCB and the Black Moon itself. With everything else gone, the Black Moon only had one conscious being left to obliterate. It opened the door to the solitary conceptual bunker and stepped inside. This doesn't make sense. How can the Black Moon, an entity beyond our dimension, beyond physical form, take a step? Good question. The same question, incidentally, that was going through the Black Moon's mind as it entered the bunker. It didn't look at all how the entity expected. It was like a bar, a counter, with rows of bottles behind it, a jukebox playing in the corner. A man stood behind the bar cleaning the glasses. The counterbalance. The administrator. He said, "Ha, well there you are. Certainly took your time. Can I pour you a little something?" This only served to increase the Black Moon's confusion. It had form here. Dark smoke compressed into a vaguely humanoid shape. It could speak. It could think. None of this made any sense. The being that had just wiped out all conscious life and seen the very death of the universe was truly and utterly confused. The administrator just seemed to be enjoying himself, preparing for a confrontation hundreds of billions of years in the making. The singular conceptual bunker, or perhaps the singular containment bunker, was a truly ingenious creation. A place of pure ideas, where everything inside was on the same level. Here there were no immortals, no gods, just ideas on the same level playing field. And it was time for the Black Moon's idea to come to an end. It was a trap, and the entire universe was the bait. Without warning, the administrator pulled up a shotgun from underneath the table and unleashed both barrels into the Black Moon's chest. The creature took the hit and fought back, dragging the administrator to the ground, beating him, strangling him. He could feel the light fading under the monster's relentless assault, until he managed to get his desperate hands on a glass ashtray. He beat the monster over the head with it until its grip loosened, and he was able to slide out. There, the killer of the universe was on the ground before him. He grabbed the monster, held it in place, and beat it to death. He was gravely injured by the battle, but the Black Moon was no more. Here in the singular conceptual bunker, he had won. The administrator, no longer the counterbalance in the absence of the Black Moon, hobbled over to the jukebox, produced a single beautiful coin from his pocket. He pushed the coin into the slot, wheezed a pained breath, and said, "The thing is, this place is only information. There's nothing else out there. Not even matter. The universe closed its doors a long time ago. But this place can go from information back to matter with just the press of a button." Let's see what happens when we introduce something to nothing. For a second, it looks as though he might fall, but he doesn't. Instead, he slams the button on the jukebox, and with a relieved laugh says, "Let there be light." And there was light. It's a natural instinct in many species to protect their young, and sometimes it's not just their own babies, but any young that look like them. Regardless of your personal feelings on humans' earliest stage, it is a scientific fact that human babies are designed to emphasize their own adorable helplessness to make sure that other older humans take care of them. A baby's cry is an inherently distressing sound, and when we hear it, some deep primal part of us feels the urge to comfort and care for the child until the sound stops. But of course, we're talking about the world of the SCP Foundation here, where there are bunnies that can eat anything, teddy bears that might steal your organs to make duplicates of themselves, and chocolate fountains filled with trillions of murderous insects. Nothing is what it seems here, and even the most innocent and cute creatures may be hiding a deadly secret, SCP-734 being no exception. Today we're talking about the baby, This anomaly proves that dangerous things can come in small packages, but where others only saw misery and death, the SCP Foundation saw a certain potential. Our story begins in the maternity ward of a hospital in the USA, where every medical professional's worst nightmare was unfolding. An unknown but incredibly fast-acting, flesh-eating pathogen seemed to be running rampant across the hospital's population. It began when patients who weren't even admitted for dermatological issues started complaining of severe itches and extreme skin pain. Some nurses and doctors in the maternity ward began to experience similar symptoms, as well as one of the infants, leading to a massive quarantine effort. While the initial symptoms first appeared to be limited to severe pain and discomfort on isolated parts of the skin, the condition of the afflicted soon escalated. Their skin began to messily flake off as the cells comprising it lost physical cohesion and died. It was a kind of strange, anomalous rot that seemed to work inwards, first destroying the integrity of the outer layer of skin, and then cause further disintegration to deeper parts of the body. Once the skin had shut off, the pathogen would turn its attention to what was lying beneath. Against all odds, the disease affected organs, muscle tissue, the vascular system, and even bones. Nothing was spared. The victims' bodies would completely break down, and they would be dead within a few hours. By the time the pathogen had finished ravaging its victims, what was left didn't even look human anymore. Not only patients, but doctors and nurses that had been walking the wards mere hours before were now little more than piles of human tissue sitting in what had previously been their hospital beds. Whatever this was, it seemed like the fastest progressing infection in recorded history. Hospital staff and administrators were terrified. This appeared to be an entirely new disease, with a mysterious form of transmission and, worst of all, no cure. They were even more confused when several black vans pulled up outside the hospital, and mysterious men in hazmat suits spilled out and began setting up a quarantine zone around the entire building. Whoever these strange people were, they definitely weren't the CDC. Little did the hospital personnel know that this was the group you'd never want showing up and putting your location on lockdown. It was the SCP Foundation. The infected remains of the victims were taken away for research purposes, and the Foundation operatives immediately began conducting debriefing interviews with witnesses. They soon determined from a mix of eyewitness accounts and hospital surveillance footage that everyone infected with the mysterious pathogen had all been in a particular section of the maternity ward earlier in the day. And when the operatives investigated this area, they found another strange detail. An infant had no registered mother present in the hospital. The Foundation would later learn that this was likely because the baby's mother was the first victim of the deadly disease. After eliminating all other possible options, it seemed that the only anomalous element that could have caused all of this was the mysterious baby. Though just how the mother even survived carrying the baby to term was a mystery in and of itself. The baby was a Caucasian male human infant between 7 and 8 months of age. Nothing appeared outwardly anomalous about the child, but they could confirm that every single victim of the anomalous pathogen had come into physical contact with the child earlier that day. Everyone who had been at the hospital was given amnestic treatment, and the Foundation constructed plausible cover stories for the deaths that had occurred that day. Like so many others before it, the child was secured and spirited away to the nearest applicable Foundation containment site. There it was reclassified SCP-034, and finally the real testing into what precisely this infant was capable of could begin. Physiologically, SCP-034 appeared mostly non-anomalous. The infant had above-average intelligence and physical aptitude for a child his age, but otherwise showed no mutations or abnormalities that would suggest a divergence from typical human biology. Despite a vast array of tests performed by the Foundation into essentially every aspect of 734's biology, they couldn't find anything that hinted at the origin of the mysterious pathogen. But through some trial and extremely costly error, the Foundation was able to learn more about how exactly the pathogen worked. The only vector for transmission seemed to be direct contact with the baby itself, up to and including the fluids and residues it leaves behind. Those affected cannot transmit the anomalous flaking effect to others, meaning the risk of an epidemic is relievingly minimal. But of course, accidents still happen. as was discovered when one agent misplaced her sympathy for the baby and decided to remove her mask while interacting with him. Her logic was that her masked face might have caused the baby some kind of distress, and as long as she was only coming into contact with him via her own gloved hands, everything would be fine. But some dust particles were floating in the air at the time, and SCP-734 sneezed in her face. The agent began screaming in pain and recoiling from the baby, but it was already too late. Her fate was sealed. She was taken to the infirmary and given sedatives so that she could hopefully die in as little pain as possible. In roughly 72% of cases, amputation of the affected areas has prevented the entire body from succumbing to the anomalous effects of SCP-734. But this isn't exactly feasible, where the point of contact is the victim's head. Within hours, the agent's flesh had flaked off her face, leaving her looking like a red, bloody skull. A few hours after that, she didn't have a head at all. Throughout the disintegration process of this unfortunate agent, the Foundation took grisly photographs. These photographs are shown to anyone preparing to work on the SCP-734 research project, to teach them a hard lesson on the importance of adhering to proper safety protocols. And these protocols about how to deal with the baby are incredibly tight, given that even incidental contact is often a death sentence. Anyone entering the baby's containment chamber needs to wear contained atmosphere hazmat suits. Anyone who makes physical contact with the baby, even when suited up, is immediately removed from the area and subject to several hours of quarantine and observation. Even inanimate objects that have been inside the containment chamber need to be thoroughly sterilized before being removed. Given that even anomalous children like SCP-734 have very delicate needs, a handler is always standing by in full hazmat gear to take care of the baby. These handlers are rotated every hour to maintain alertness and safety. These handlers feed and change SCP-734 regularly, and sometimes even provide toys that have been approved by the O5 Council. The Foundation has gone to great lengths to keep SCP-734 alive and comfortable, because they believe that SCP-734 could be an important asset for them in the future. Or more specifically, they see great strategic value in SCP-734's blood. As mentioned earlier, contact with any matter from SCP-734 triggers its deadly anomalous effects, including bodily fluids like blood. But unlike many toxic pathogens, in this case, there is no risk of the infection getting out of control, since the infected do not become vectors for transmission. Because of this, the blood of SCP-734 can act as a powerful weapon for both terminating anomalies deemed unviable by the O5 Council and assassinating dangerous people who belong to rival groups. Contact with the blood would completely destroy the target's body, with no other anomalous effects and no evidence of who exactly conducted the hit. SCP-734 has been fitted with an arterial catheter so that the Foundation can collect large quantities of blood from the anomalous infant every single week for storage and research. But it isn't just the blood that the Foundation sees potential in. SCP-734 himself has scored incredibly well on the Esslinger Loyalty Index, the test the Foundation uses to judge the loyalty of potential applicants to the Foundation cause. As SCP-734 matures, if these scores remain consistent, he will likely be trained to become a Foundation field agent in the future. An agent capable of killing someone with a touch would, needless to say, be an asset to certain covert missions that the Foundation would probably prefer to keep off the books. Of course, the SCP Foundation recruiting certain compliant anomalies to perform missions for them is far from unprecedented. The most infamous of these is SCP-076, also known as Abel, a supernatural, eternally resurrecting swordsman, and perhaps one of the finest warriors who ever lived. The Foundation took note of this, and channeled his eternal thirst for battle into working with his very own mobile task force. He could assist in missions by taking out his bloodlust on enemy groups of interest and dangerous anomalies. However, this ended up working a little too well and led to disaster. Abel was so good at his job that he burned through all of his allotted missions at astonishing speed. Left with nothing more to do, Abel got antsy, which led him to turning his murderous desires on his fellow team members, and then the Foundation as a whole. It was an all-out massacre before his colleagues were finally able to kill him and return him to containment. The failure of this initiative gave the very idea of letting anomalies work for the Foundation in the field a bad name. But since then, things have changed, especially with the establishment of MTF Alpha 9, aka Last Hope, a new mobile task force formed entirely of anomalous individuals and their handlers. These consist of somewhat more stable anomalies, such as Abel's counterpart SCP-073, also known as Kane. Kane cannot be harmed, with any harm befalling him simply being mirrored back on his attacker, and his vast array of knowledge makes him an incredibly useful, intelligent asset. Another of the several members of Last Hope is Iris, also known as SCP-105. Much like Kane, Iris not only has anomalous powers that make her immensely valuable for missions in the field, she's also compliant and capable of listening to reason, unlike Kane. Her abilities include being able to actively surveil and even interact with photos of any location, especially when taken with her anomalous camera. Someday, SCP-734 could count himself among other anomalous Foundation agents like these, providing he continues to show promise and doesn't develop a dislike of the Foundation as he ages, since after all, he won't be a baby forever. So if you ever find yourself on the Foundation's bad side, you have a good reason to be paranoid. You'll have no idea that one day, the man who's going to kill you will approach and shake your hand with a smile. It won't be until later, when you feel that strange tingle on your palm and feel the skin starting to flake away, that you'll realize you've been a dead man walking for hours. Imagine knowing that there's a monster right under your nose. Imagine knowing that this monster is capable of killing any human being on Earth, and all because they simply saw a photograph of its face. When this monster is on the warpath, literally nothing can stop it. No weapon that human beings have invented is capable of even slowing it down. Imagine knowing, in the age of mass media, of clicks and shares, of 24-hour news, smartphones, and limitless social media connecting billions across the globe, that one stray picture of this monster leaked in the wrong place could cause the end of the world as we know it. And this fateful, terrifying day could come at any time. Congratulations, you now know how it feels to be Dr. Dan, the hot-headed lead SCP Foundation researcher on the SCP-096 case. The anomaly itself requires no real introduction. The infamous mass-murdering Shy Guy has haunted the nightmares of Foundation experts for years, but nobody is more haunted by this thing than Dr. Dan himself. For over a decade now, he has firmly believed that there's one solution to the 096 problem: termination with extreme prejudice. In his eyes, to think that 096 is ever truly contained is an illusion. They could never be sure of how many pictures of it are out there, floating around just waiting to be seen, like a time bomb waiting to go off. The resources spent containing it and cleaning up after its rampages, he would often argue, would be better spent instead figuring out how to finally kill it. But seeing as we're talking about the SCP Foundation here, not the Global Occult Coalition, the O5 Council didn't see it quite the same way. They constantly overturned Dr. Dan's termination requests, leaving the paranoid researcher more furious with each rejection. He tried to warn them again and again and again.
Don't you see? It's like a stick of dynamite, and the fuse is already lit. If you don't let me put it out before it's too late, there won't even be anyone left to pick up the pieces.
But his pleas fell on deaf ears. Until, of course, Incident 096-1-A. A dark and bloody day still looked back on with shame and horror by even the most hardened members of Foundation staff. It was the day that SCP-096 gave everyone a taste of the mass carnage it was truly capable of. Dr. Dan wasn't even there when Containment was first breached. He was off on an expedition in the snowy mountains where 096 was first found, trying to discover clues to its true origin. Dr. Dan's second-in-command, Dr. Alexei, was also lucky enough to be outside of the containment area when the Shy Guy escaped. According to interviews he gave at debriefing tribunals, he was in the break room, treating himself to a warm cup of joe. All the other personnel assigned to 096's containment and research were near its containment chamber, a giant cube made of reinforced metal, observing a live feed of data being collected from the cube's interior. As usual, sensors indicated that 096 was pacing within. For obvious reasons, the Foundation doesn't maintain any kind of live visual surveillance on 096. It wouldn't be worth the risk. But what seemed like an otherwise quiet day suddenly took a turn for the insane. The monitors began displaying terrifying data, indicating an imminent containment breach as the wails of the creature within the cube echoed out through its metal walls. Some tried to run. Others did all they could to engage emergency procedures, while guards armed with heavy weaponry rushed into the room. They all knew in their hearts that it wouldn't save them, but what else could they do? A huge dent bulged out from the side of the cube, then another, before the metal was torn open like tissue paper as the furious hands of the Shy Guy began clawing their way through it. Secondary layers of protection were deployed, but they didn't help. 096 just kept ripping through all the barriers. As everyone in attendance knew, once it was in its rage state, nothing could stop it. Literally nothing. The guards attempted to fire on the anomaly, but their bullets did no good. As the creature burst free, most of the people in the room had at least momentary visual contact with its face. In response, Code Lima was declared, and the entire chamber was flooded with a fast-acting nerve gas, killing everyone. Everyone except for 096 itself, of course. Within 2 minutes, 096 had broken free of the entire containment site and began running through the desert at breakneck speeds towards its distant target. The Foundation needed to act fast and find a way to stop it before it hit a population center where the death toll would skyrocket. Team Echo Romeo were dispatched to pursue the creature in a heavily armed attack helicopter, while MTF Tau-1, a task force specializing in SCP-096 containment and recovery, forged ahead to identify the anomaly's target, designated 096-1, and to move any other civilians out of harm's way. Dr. Dan was alerted of the disastrous situation and offered guidance to both teams from afar. Echo Romeo's chopper pursued 096, barely able to keep up. Dr. Dan recommended attempting to at least slow the creature down with heavy arms fire, even though he knew actually stopping it would be impossible. A member of the team used a modified XM500 anti-material rifle to fire several rounds at the creature, but even the shot that passed directly through its head appeared to have no effect on it. But at least they had a lock on its direction now. 096 always travels in a straight line, directly towards its target, smashing through any obstacles in its way. This means its intended direction is relatively easy to track, and people in the path of its trajectory are even easier to save. But it's a high-pressure job reserved for MTF Tau-1. Tau-1 passed over Echo Romeo and 096 in a series of 8 V-22 Ospreys, hoping beyond hope that they could outrun the creature, since there were several different towns in its direct path. But thanks once again to the one and only Dr. Dan, Echo Romeo and Tau-1 had a secret weapon that neither team had ever possessed before: Scramble. Scramble was an advanced computer program created by Dr. Dan with the help of Dr. Alexei, which was coded into microprocessors for modification into camera feeds and viewing goggles. The program had been fed intricate data concerning every single detail of 096's face, and as the name suggests, when encountering that visual data in real life, it scrambles it beyond recognition. In theory, it would make it far safer for operatives to be around SCP-096 without activating its rage state. In theory. It wasn't long before disaster struck. 096 had made its way onto I-40 and had begun attacking vehicles it encountered, killing the people inside. By this point, it had already outrun the Echo Romeo chopper, rendering them essentially useless. Tau-1 just had to forge ahead along 096's trajectory and try to get as many people out of the danger zone as possible, until 096-1 was located and destroyed by the anomaly. Years of training for an awful day like this had paid off, as the first 3 towns along 096's path were successfully evacuated. The Shy Guy just ran right through all of them, and no lives were lost. The same, however, could not be said for town number 4. As was standard procedure, Tau 1 had everyone in the town gathered up and blindfolded. The entire team in attendance had modified night vision goggles with scramble microprocessors, so in theory, they were better off than most from 096 if things went south. The Tau 1 members tried in vain to keep everybody in line. They were threatening to shoot anyone who dared to remove their blindfold when 096 finally appeared. It tripped during its approach, rolling and shattering through several houses. Chaos erupted. Some people instinctively removed their blindfolds to see what was going on, and panicked members of Tau 1 began firing into the crowd. The screams of the civilians and the bursts of gunfire were all drowned out by the horrific wailing of 096 itself, as it tore through everyone and everything to kill the unfortunate souls who had seen its face. And given how many had removed their blindfolds during the initial pandemonium, SCP-096 had a huge number of the townspeople on its list. 096 located and grabbed the original 096-1, the person that had first glimpsed its face and caused all of this. But in the grand scheme of things, he was just one more body on the pile that day. Though of course we mean this in a purely metaphorical sense. 096 never leaves entire bodies. The Foundation operatives in attendance were able to figure out what had caused all this madness and death. 096-1 had been an amateur mountaineer and spent his vacations hiking around any mountain ranges he could gain access to, including the mountain range that 096 had been inhabiting prior to its initial capture and containment. But he hadn't actually seen 096 on that fateful trip, which had been taken over a decade ago. But in a photograph taken that day of himself, standing on a picturesque mountainside, 096 made a cameo. It took up all of 4 pixels, a tiny off-white dot against the snow on the back right side of the photograph. This photograph, with all the deadly potency of an atom bomb, had been sitting there for years, waiting. When the mountaineer was looking through old photos that morning and his eyes passed over those few blurry pixels, he didn't have any idea that he had just laid his eyes on one of the most dangerous anomalies the world has ever seen. But you don't have to know. Only 096 does. As Tau 1, led by their commander Major Jack Wilford, tried to retake control of the situation, things got even worse. It turned out Dr. Dan's scramble technology, the one thing that was supposed to have given them an edge in this situation, didn't actually work. As soon as goggle-wearing members of the team laid eyes on 096, it entered its rage state and started massacring them. It tore many of the Mobile Task Force members to shreds, including a number of the operatives required for piloting the 8 Ospreys. It was a disaster of truly epic proportions, and the catastrophic failure of Dr. Dan's scramble technology was a key factor. The root of the technology's failure was easy enough to figure out. Dr. Dan's scramble microprocessors worked fast, but not fast enough. Fractions of a second glimpses of 096's face managed to get through, and that was more than enough to set 096 off. Echo Romeo and MTF Epsilon arrived shortly afterwards to clean up the mess. It'd been a disaster of such magnitude that even a CNN reporter arrived on the scene and started filming before being promptly shut down by Epsilon. It was a member of Echo Romeo that finally slipped the bag over a docile 096's head, preparing it for containment once again, the creature now content that it had eliminated all of the unfortunate souls who had seen its face. He'd found 096 sitting next to a minivan that had its roof ripped off, the young family inside being the last to have seen its face. And things were so awful in the aftermath of the containment breach that the O5 Council changed their tune, finally granting Dr. Dan permission to terminate 096 by any means necessary. It's terrifying to think that all this can unfold because of a couple of poorly timed accidents. But it's probably even more terrifying to consider that it wasn't an accident at all. It seemed awfully convenient that both Dr. Dan and Dr. Alexei were far from danger when all hell broke loose. It was also convenient that, despite the failure of his technology being a major reason why the breach was as deadly as it was, Dr. Dan had still come out of the situation with everything he wanted. The Foundation also found this strange, and the more they looked into it, the more they found details that didn't add up. Alibis began to fall apart.
Coincidences didn't seem so coincidental, and eventually a weak link in the chain was identified: Dr. Alexei. Under pressure from the Foundation, Alexei spilled everything. Dr. Dan had essentially orchestrated the entire containment breach, and on top of that, he did everything he could to make it as deadly as possible, all with the purpose of getting the O5 Council to see things his way, and finally give him the permission he needed to devote all of the SCP-096 resources to its termination. But it came at a terrible price to Dr. Dan personally. For his crimes against the Foundation and humanity, he was permitted to try and figure out a way to terminate 096 once and for all. But as payment for his crimes, he himself would also be terminated as soon as his task was complete. Were the lives of all those innocent people, and Dr. Dan himself, worth the price of finally being authorized to terminate SCP-096? When asked why he did all of this, Dr. Dan simply said, "It worked. There was only a matter of time until that happened in a major population center, and its face spread over the world news. I can kill 096, but I've killed myself in the process." While we don't agree with his methods, there's something almost admirable about a person so single-mindedly devoted to their cause. On a cold October night in 2003, Shirley Yates of Seattle, Washington was just about to get ready for bed when she heard a knock at the door. She approached the door and asked the person on the other side to identify themselves. The voice outside responded immediately. It was a salesman who just wanted a few moments of Mrs. Yates' time. This was odd for two reasons. First, it was almost 10 o'clock at night, much later than is usual for door-to-door salesmen. And second, the knock hadn't come from Mrs. Yates's front door. It was coming from the door to her bathroom. Has your home ever been visited by a door-to-door salesman? If you were born in the last 40 years, then your answer to that question is probably no. In the age of online shopping, the idea of a salesperson going from house to house hawking vacuum cleaners or encyclopedia sets feels like a relic from the past. It's highly unlikely you'd ever see one walking the streets nowadays, and equally unlikely that one would knock on your front door. However, if you live in Washington state, you might need to be wary of a certain salesman who is still doing the rounds. SCP-1879, also known as the Indoor Salesman and the Doorman, is a phenomenon that manifests randomly in homes throughout Washington. Subjects will hear persistent knocking from the interior doors of their homes, and the affected door becomes classified as SCP-1879-1. The knocking doesn't stop until the door is opened, at which point the subject will be greeted by SCP-1879-2, a Caucasian man of indeterminate age standing around 170 centimeters tall. The man will claim to be a salesman and immediately try to pitch a bizarre product to the subject whose home he's just invaded. The SCP Foundation was first alerted to the existence of the indoor salesman when they had intercepted a 911 call coming from the home of Mrs. Shirley Yates. She had opened the door to her bathroom in an attempt to get the salesman to stop knocking, and once he was in her home, he refused to leave. According to Yates, he kept disappearing in and out of random doors in her house. Foundation Field Agent Rogers was equipped with a recording device and sent in to investigate the case with several other agents. When he arrived at the home, he found Mrs. Yates inconsolable. SCP-1879-2 was still rapidly talking at her, and strangely enough, the product he was holding and trying to sell to her was a Border Collie puppy. As soon as Agent Rogers entered the room, the man shifted his attention away from Mrs. Yates and towards him. He then started trying to sell the puppy to Agent Rogers. Agent Rogers did not want to purchase this puppy, but he found that the man spoke so quickly and urgently, he couldn't get a word in edgewise. The man was begging Rogers to take the puppy, practically shoving it in his face, saying that he didn't need any money, and that the only payment he needed would be some of your time. Rogers grew so annoyed at being talked over and interrupted that he ordered the other field agents to apprehend the indoor salesman. They did so, but as soon as the agents walked him out of the front door of the house, he disappeared without a trace. The agents remained in the area to monitor the situation. SCP-1879-2 manifested again in Mrs. Yates's home 6 hours later, still trying to trade the puppy for no money, just a little of her time, 12 years to be precise. After hours and hours of being worn down by this supernaturally pushy salesman, Yates relented and agreed to take the puppy, and immediately disappeared. The indoor salesman then disappeared himself through the closet door before he could be apprehended again. At a loss for what to do, the agents administered Class A amnestics to Mrs. Yates's family and left. The reason for her disappearance wasn't fully known until 12 years later in 2015, when she reappeared in the same spot she disappeared from, having no concept of how much time had passed. The puppy really had just cost her 12 years of her life. Stories like that of Shirley Yates have popped up all over the state in the years since, from Everett to Walla Walla and everywhere in between. Due to the random nature of SCP-1879 events and the way the indoor salesman can disappear instantly in and out of any door in a building, the SCP Foundation has been unable to capture him. The best they've been able to do is monitor 911 calls from across the state, listening for keywords that might indicate another SCP-1879 infestation. When such an event is reported, the Foundation deploys Mobile Task Force Row 4, aka Shoes Salesman. This task force's entire purpose is to minimize the amount of harm the indoor salesman is able to cause by intercepting him before he can make a sale. This is a very important task, as evidenced by the story of Mrs. Yates, since while the products this salesman sells might be innocent, he doesn't accept payment in any normal currency. The price he asks for his products are always bizarre and often deadly. If all someone loses is 12 years of their life, they could be considered to be getting off easy. In one instance, the product being sold was a single red rose in exchange for the subject's heart. Once the deal was sealed, the subject dropped dead on the spot, with an autopsy revealing that his heart and circulatory system vanished from inside his body. In another, the indoor salesman offered 220 bananas and told the subject to simply give him some sugar. The subject agreed, and all candied goods in the home disappeared. In a third, the indoor salesman was trying to sell a thermonuclear warhead, the price of which was the subject's soul. The subject accepted, and at first nothing seemed to have happened. The Foundation confiscated the warhead and placed it into non-anomalous containment. Later that day, the subject went to listen to some music, only to find that 2 of her vinyl records had gone missing: Lady Soul and Almighty Fire by world-famous soul singer Aretha Franklin. So, even though he's incredibly invasive, annoying, and his transactions can be deadly, the indoor salesman still maintains a sense of humor. The fact that the Foundation can't capture the indoor salesman means that a lot of questions about him remain unanswered. The biggest by far is why he does what he does. In most SCP-1879 events, the indoor salesman seems frantic and desperate to make a sale. Often he will refer to having quotas and deadlines to meet, which implies some other unseen entity that he has to answer to. These questions remain unanswered because all attempts to interrogate the indoor salesman have been unsuccessful. When he manifests in a location, it's impossible to get him to stray from a sales pitch, and he disappears as soon as he successfully sells his wares. However, there was one instance where, after an SCP-1879 event took place, Foundation agents were there to witness a rare interaction between the indoor salesman and his mysterious employers. Agent Rogers and the rest of the shoes salesmen were called out to a home in Spokane, where rapid knocking had begun to emanate from the bedroom door. Equipped with recording devices, Rogers was able to record the voice of the indoor salesman coming from inside the bedroom. In the recording, the salesman grumbled to himself about not being able to meet his quota by tomorrow, saying that if he didn't, he'd be stuck in this world for the next century. He started knocking again, yelling through the door that he knew they were home. He kept knocking until he was interrupted by the sound of a phone ringing. The indoor salesman was heard picking it up, and Rogers managed to record the conversation. The person calling was, apparently, the indoor salesman's boss, who was calling to complain about his performance. Only one side of the conversation was heard, but evidently the indoor salesman's boss wasn't too happy about receiving 2 Aretha Franklin albums as payment instead of an actual human soul. The indoor salesman apologized for the joke, then told his boss, "It won't happen again, please don't hurt it. I'll meet the quota this time, I swear." He hung up, grumbling to himself again, "I better get to move up to at least accounting this time. I've paid my dues and then some." Rogers finally opened the door to the apparent disappointment of the indoor salesman, who was hoping to speak with the home's owner and was quite annoyed at having another one of his sales interrupted by MTF Row 4. Rogers tried to ask the indoor salesman who he'd just been speaking to on the phone, but as usual, the salesman started talking over him.
Now see here, let's think logically,
he said.
You know I'm not going to tell you anything. I know you're not likely to buy what I'm selling. So let's just move on to greener pastures. I'm coming up close to a deadline, and I'm sure you're swamped with making sure good people don't lose their jobs, so I'll just be on my way and let you do that. Ciao.
The indoor salesman tried to close the door, but Agent Rogers blocked it with his arm. He was tired of this SCP giving him the runaround, and he was going to keep the indoor salesman here if it was the last thing he did. He demanded the entity stay and be interviewed, and other members of the task force apprehended the salesman, making sure he couldn't leave the room. The indoor salesman, now held in place by several armed men, seemed to finally relent. He told Rogers,
I'm busy, so I'll tell you what. I'm going to give you something, no money out of your pocket, and we'll call it even. Sound good?
Rogers, just wanting to get this whole thing over with, agreed to those terms. 3 seconds later, every agent on the scene was dead, and the indoor salesman was able to straighten his tie, pick up his briefcase, and walk through the door to the bathroom. When the bodies of Agent Rogers and the rest of the MTF Row 4 were examined by Foundation scientists, the cause of death was found to be, in every case, thousands of coins suddenly appearing in not only their pockets, but also inside their stomachs, lungs, and even under their skin. Later that day, the indoor salesman was reported at a home in the same neighborhood. He was seen trying to sell the house's owner, 80-year-old retiree Alan Johnson, a Glock 18 pistol in exchange for his attention. As he had done so many times before, the indoor salesman disappeared through another door before the Foundation was able to reach the scene. And when the SCP arrived, they found Mr. Johnson still alive, but now missing his prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that controls attention. It's likely that, because of the nature of the entity, SCP-1879 might be entirely impossible to contain. The Foundation might never find out anything more than what they already know about the indoor salesman, the way he's able to manifest behind closed doors, or the reason he has to keep filling quotas for an unseen boss who apparently doesn't have a very good sense of humor. So, if you're ever in Washington State, be careful who you open your doors to, especially if the knocking you hear is coming from inside your house. Let's start off with a difficult question. How do you define reality? What is truly real? Is it simply a case of what we can see? If something is known as fact and can be proven to exist, does this make it real? Is reality just the world around us, or is there something more? The goal of these questions isn't to make you question every part of the world around you, or to question whether or not we are all living in a computer simulation. No, you're asked this to help you understand reality. Because first of all, we aren't living in a simulation. We're living in a sitcom. There is a wide-ranging debate on what the most powerful and dangerous SCPs ever encountered are, but there is no denying the ever-present danger of SCP-3812. This Keter-class entity is regarded as highly aggressive by the O5 Council, especially as it has only ever been partially contained, never fully. The true scope of its abilities is currently unknown, and any available information on SCP-3812 is kept classified and secure by the Foundation. Needless to say, this entity poses a direct threat not only to the SCP Foundation, but to the very fabric of reality itself. Contained within the file for SCP-3812 is an excerpt from an article by one Dr. Robert Scranton, titled Supersession and the Echelon of Reality. In this article, Dr. Scranton posits a theory about the nature of reality, and understanding him is the first step towards understanding SCP-3812. His recursive stack theory states that there are different layers to reality, but also that no single universe is real. An easy way to think of it is to imagine a sitcom. Any sitcom you can envision will do. Between us and the fictional world of a sitcom, there are multiple observable stacked universes. Firstly, our universe, the real world as we experience it, forms the baseline. So imagine this sitting at the top of the stack. Next down in the stack comes the sitcom, a fictional universe filled with characters, which fits below our universe. Then think of what is fiction within the fiction of the sitcom. Perhaps another television show, one that only exists in the world of the sitcom but not in our own. This is the recursive stack, infinitely layered universes, and it is crucial you can envision and remember this model. Dr. Scranton's theory suggests that any universe, even our own, could potentially exist as a fictional narrative within another, wider universe. This wider universe, in which ours is a fiction, could also itself be a narrative within an even wider universe stacked above it, and so on. It's interesting to picture reality this way, isn't it? In fact, I'm willing to bet that you're wondering, maybe there's a universe above ours, or even one above that. Would the universe right at the top of the stack be the truly real world? And what if you could travel between each stacked reality? If you're asking any of those questions, then congratulations. You sound exactly like SCP-3812. SCP-3812 was previously known as Sam Howell. While little is known about his life, Sam was, as far as anyone knew, regarded as a fairly ordinary human being, until his death in 1996, shortly after which Sam rose from his grave and disappeared. It is unknown whether SCP-3812 simply imitated the form of Sam Howell or if they are one and the same, as this entity has been known to have the ability to change forms at will, making it hard for the Foundation to track it. It does usually maintain a humanoid appearance, however this has deteriorated somewhat over numerous decades. By now you may have already gathered that the extent of SCP-3812's abilities don't end at shapeshifting. This SCP is a powerful, aggressive, reality-altering entity. Cast your mind back to the recursive stack. SCP-3812 is able to travel upwards through these stacked universes, creating untold chaos using its plethora of world-bending abilities. As far as the SCP Foundation can tell, 3812's sole intention is to become an omnipotent force existing above any and all possible universes. In other words, the top of the stack. Aside from the ability to change shape, SCP-3812's control and alteration of a reality around it is achieved by its long list of latent abilities. This entity is capable of feats far beyond that of normal humans, such as teleportation, telekinesis, and telepathy. However, SCP-3812 is also able to directly manipulate any and all aspects of reality. It can influence and alter observable forces around us, for example the manipulation of matter, energy, weather, and even gravity and other laws of physics as we know them. But the creature can also warp reality on further levels. It's able to erase people, objects, or even concepts to the point where human beings lose virtually all memory of them. With the danger that an entity this powerful poses to our reality, it's not surprising that the SCP Foundation would attempt to nullify its abilities. One attempt by the Foundation involved another unknown SCP, which created an anti-metaphysical field. This was done in the hopes that it would strip SCP-3812 of its reality warping abilities. However, the entity was unfazed. The containment attempt failed, and the remains of the unknown SCP instead resulted in the creation of SCP-239. As for the SCP-3812 entity's own origin, that is still largely unknown. But there does exist a message on a secure server in the SCP Foundation's O5 command, seemingly from another entity belonging to a reality stacked higher above our own, that appears to have created a reality much further down, one that SCP-3812 inhabited, and now it seems that SCP-3812 is climbing up the stack. There is a trade-off of sorts to the abundance of powers SCP-3812 possesses. The entity is in an almost constant state of ascension through different stacked universes, climbing higher and higher, believing every reality beneath it to be a fiction. The creature has developed multiple severe mental conditions that seem to be a direct result of overexposure to different layers of reality. This includes an advanced form of Enigman-Viator schizophrenia complex, which often manifests in extreme symptoms within the creature. SCP-3812 has been known to suffer from paranoia, dysphoria, depression, an inability to control its emotions, as well as hearing voices, seeing things that do not exist, and possessing multiple personalities. While the creature is usually aimless, SCP-3812 has been known to have random outbursts that can cause anomalies within local space and time. But thanks to it experiencing so many different layers of reality, traveling upwards through what it perceives to be fictional universes, SCP-3812 displays difficulty in separating what is real and what is imagined. In fact, reality and fiction have become one and the same to SCP-3812, because as far as it is concerned, they literally are the same. Each new reality it inhabits is just fiction for the reality stacked above it. So then how are we supposed to contain or neutralize such a powerful reality-altering creature that cannot distinguish between what is real and what is fictional? The Foundation knows that its own procedures to keep SCP-3812 contained would be ineffective. This entity by its nature cannot be contained. Any attempt to keep it locked away would easily be undone by any one of its numerous powers to warp reality. Locking it in a cement box at the bottom of the ocean would be pointless. It could teleport out, or turn its cell into nothing but dust. Putting it in a vat of acid to endlessly burn it would just result in it turning that acid to harmless water or air. SCP-3812 can manipulate events throughout time, and so it could easily prevent itself from ever being contained. It is even possible that any individuals, even Foundation staff who may have previously tried to lock the creature up, now no longer exist thanks to SCP-3812's abilities. And there would be no way to determine this, since we wouldn't be able to remember that the person had ever been in our reality. The Foundation's best hope is to keep SCP-3812 where it is, and hope it remains docile. If they are able to keep it away from large population centers, then the risk of 3812 having any sort of psychic influence over citizens or warping reality and causing the deaths of millions or even billions is at least reduced. But of course, it is never fully gone. On at least one occasion, SCP-3812 has caused a truly catastrophic event. For some reason, SCP-3812 decided to turn itself into a star, spinning endlessly. And it did so. Numerous anomalous occurrences took place across the world. Most notably, SCP-3812 caused the Foundation's nuclear warheads to detonate, spreading harmful radioactive material into the atmosphere. Additionally, the population of New Zealand began to sporadically disappear and reappear, looping back and forth between existence and non-existence for a period of around 5 hours. It was during this world-ending scenario that SCP-3812, still at the center of its star form, was recorded ranting, its split personalities arguing. One of the creature's personalities claimed it was unmaking the world as an act of revenge against someone. It stated that it believed, "Existence is a joke. The narrative abandoned us to be miserable, and we are breaking the narrative." Its other half mentioned another entity known only as Ben, and seemed to imply that this entity was responsible for SCP-3812's creation in a reality stacked above this one. According to the more rational of 3812's two halves, this Ben entity deemed us unfit to rest peacefully, to slip into the darkness quietly. He made a game of us. It then went on to convince this other half that destroying this reality just to slight Ben would be pointless. There would always be another, stacked on top infinitely. "So why does this narrative mean anything to you?" it asked. "It is one of an eternity to others. It is not special. It is not particular." The two sides of SCP-3812 argued with each other, one wanting to destroy all of reality to spite Ben, driven mad by witnessing trillions upon trillions of universes stacked atop each other. The other half of 3812 saw peace for itself, ascending above these infinitely stacked universes, finally reaching the top and becoming free. Not a god, a star rising in the east, rising away from this all until we are little more than a memory of a song. "It will be lonely," the other half of the creature replied. "We'll have each other," SCP-3812's other personality said. "I'm afraid," said the one intent on destruction. "I am too," the other reassured it. But that is no reason to destroy this narrative. Eventually, SCP-3812's personalities reached agreement. They both left the narrative they were currently in, presumably traveling upwards to one stacked above our own, while simultaneously remaining in this universe. Still a danger. Let go of this world. Let him rewrite it back to what it was. We aren't part of this anymore. Shortly after this event, reality shifted once more, and the entire world reverted back to how it had been before. Records of the end-of-the-world scenario that had occurred were retained by high-level administrators and the O5 Council, perhaps as a reminder of the destructive capabilities of the creature, a warning of its potential to change this reality and any stacked below or above it. Fortunately, since this incident, SCP-3812 has remained in its docile, aimless state, no longer actively hostile to anyone that approaches it. It has kept its amorphous star-like shape, and is still very much able to create disruptions and anomalies in reality. Despite keeping SCP-3812 constantly monitored at its current location in the South Pacific Ocean, the SCP Foundation knows that, at any time, this entity could trigger yet another global catastrophe, causing massive damage to planet Earth, its population, and beyond that, tearing our reality itself asunder. So we all just better hope our narrative remains worthwhile to SCP-3812's better half. It's a perfect day for a wedding. On a warm spring afternoon, a bride and a handsome groom are exchanging the special rings they had custom designed and made for each other. As they take turns placing the rings on each other's fingers, a man standing at the end of the wedding party steps out of position. He approaches the groomsman next to him and reaches into his jacket, taking out a pair of pliers that he hands to the groomsman. The groomsman happily takes the tool and then, without any hesitation, shoves the pliers into his mouth and begins removing his teeth one by one. When he is finished, he hands the bloody teeth to the man along with the pliers. The man then goes to the next groomsman, who repeats the same process. He continues going down the line until all of the groomsmen and bridesmaids have removed their teeth, seemingly without pain or resistance. The man then approaches the bride and groom. He hands each of them half of the pile of teeth, which they gladly accept. They then begin to eat the teeth without delay, seemingly not bothered by the intense damage they're causing to their own teeth and jaws by doing so. The man watches as the groom moves the priest who is officiating the wedding aside. As the entire church looks on in joy, the groom opens his mouth, and the deafening sound of cicadas are heard. This is only the beginning of what the SCP Foundation has labeled an SCP-2852 event, a terrifying and little understood phenomenon that is better known by the nickname of the anomalous creature responsible for them, Cousin Johnny. The Foundation had been trying to contain Cousin Johnny for decades, not that it ever done them any good. Johnny is a Keter-class anomaly that's thus far proven impossible to contain. This is an entity so dangerous and volatile that 3 different mobile task forces are devoted to detecting and disrupting its activities. MTF Upsilon 36, aka the Party Crashers, MTF Upsilon 52, aka Cater Duty, and MTF Upsilon 99, aka the Altar Boys. But so far, all the Foundation has been able to really do is swoop in afterwards and do their best to pick up the pieces of people's shattered lives. Cousin Johnny has so far been observed to only operate in the North American subcontinent, and only seems to appear at Anglican or Catholic baptisms, weddings, and funerals. However, Foundation operatives charged with keeping a lid on Cousin Johnny harbor the hidden fear that he may one day expand his hunting grounds and wreak terror worldwide. If Johnny became multinational or multi-denominational, his violence, insanity, and pure evil may truly become impossible to minimize. So compatible communities are constantly monitored for increased levels of juvenile delinquency, sterility, domestic violence, and divorce. After all this, you're probably wondering, who or what actually is Cousin Johnny, and how does he cause so much horrific tragedy? At face value, nothing about the appearance of Cousin Johnny would suggest an anomalous nature, or even any sort of danger. He appears to be a middle-aged white male, often with scruffy hair and a beard. On a cellular level too, Cousin Johnny appears all too human, but when you look at his physiology, it's a whole different story. Cousin Johnny has no identifiable organs whatsoever. His body is made out of a fibrous muscular tissue. The only exceptions are his teeth and hair, which are made out of a kind of chitin, a key component of insect exoskeletons, such as those possessed by cicadas. Johnny's eyes are the first clue that something is off about him. From a distance they appear perfectly normal, but up close they're glassy and dead. This is because his eyes aren't actually attached to any nerves inside his head. With no nervous system or vocal cords, Johnny's ability to see, move, and talk defy any kind of logical explanation. His speech will seem completely normal to the people under his spell, but to anyone else it comes out as complete nonsense, often described as word salad. If people in attendance are briefed in advance about this phenomenon, whatever hypnotic ability causes them to hear his sounds as intelligible words won't work, and they'll be aware of how nonsensical it all sounds. But of course, that doesn't mean they're safe. Cousin Johnny appears at family gatherings and religious rituals, and immediately he'll be treated as though he's always been there. You know your Cousin Johnny, right? You go way back. Or at least you're pretty sure you do. Nothing will appear unnatural about his sudden presence. In fact, if you're one of the victims of one of his incidents, chances are you'll actually find yourself taking a shine to Cousin Johnny. Sure, his sense of humor is a little crude and raunchy, but you can't help but enjoy his company. He's a fun guy to be around, and after all, he's family.
As previously mentioned, he'll only appear at 3 different kinds of events: baptisms, weddings, and funerals, and only those that are affiliated with either the Catholic or Anglican religions. The SCP Foundation has classified baptisms that Cousin Johnny attends as blue-level events, weddings are known as white-level events, and funerals are black-level events, with each one escalating in severity, violence, and horror.
First, baptisms, the blue-level events. In these events, Cousin Johnny will appear and begin to act as a third godparent, despite there traditionally only being 2. As the infant is lowered into the holy water, the entirety of their top layer of skin will come off like a molting snake. Despite looking horrific, this apparently causes no harm to the child. The godparents will then eat this discarded skin as though it's the most normal thing in the world. After this, the family will leave the church together, and Cousin Johnny will leave with them. He won't appear at any subsequent celebrations of the child's baptism. Of course, this is just the beginning of the terror. Following Cousin Johnny's appearance at the baptism, the child's risk of dying in the next 6 months skyrockets, and if they survive, they're at an increased risk of becoming unstable and violent later on in life. Their parents and godparents will both become unable to conceive any further children and are likely to be found dead from drowning within 5 years of the event. Those who are only tangentially involved in the baptism ritual have a massively increased chance of failed pregnancies, or if they do conceive, they may become a danger to their offspring. Children who live through blue-level events and survive past adolescence will experience adverse side effects when encountering the songs of cicadas well into adulthood, from experiencing physical sickness to going through dangerous psychotic episodes. Weddings or white-level events are more complex and severe. In this case, Cousin Johnny will insert himself into the wedding as a groomsman, and the most horrifying events will begin to take place after the vows have been exchanged. Johnny will provide various implements that allow the bridesmaids and groomsmen to remove their teeth, which are then given to the bride and groom to eat, which they do, causing severe damage to their own teeth in the process. The groom will then vocalize an unknown cicada call at an incredible volume, as loud as 140 decibels in some instances, rendering the bride and everyone else near the altar completely deaf. At the wedding reception, where everyone is continuing to behave as if nothing out of the ordinary is happening, Cousin Johnny will ruin things farther by giving the best man's speech. The speech is more of his typical complete nonsense, though if you're there you'll never realize this, and think that this is the best speech you've ever heard, with some in the audience laughing hysterically while others cry uncontrollably. Once his speech is done, he'll present a gift to the newly married couple: 3.5 kilograms of human hair in various colors, 13 deceased specimens of a certain cicada known as Linnaeus cicada, and 23 human teeth in a cardboard box. DNA tests on all the gifts have been inconclusive as to their origin. Much like many celebrity marriages, unions that occurred during white-level events never last, and all end up divorced within 2 years, often as a result of domestic violence, and any children born during their brief marriage will be violent and unstable. But it's not just the wedding party that gets to experience the fun of a visit from Cousin Johnny. All married individuals who attended the wedding will find that they are unable to conceive children, despite no biological indicators of infertility. Any children present at the white-level event will show no interest in romance throughout their life, and often die tragically before reaching the age of 18. Finally, and most horrifying of all, are funerals. or black level events. While blue and white level events can potentially be disrupted before they are completed, lessening or preventing the horrific results, there is as yet no way to stop or prevent a black level event at any stage. Any attempts to prevent Cousin Johnny from entering the church or funeral home will lead him to simply manifesting inside. Once in the room where the funeral is taking place, Cousin Johnny will first take up the role of eulogizer and begin speaking his standard nonsense to the attendants. The person who was emotionally closest to the departed will then open the casket, if this was not already an open casket funeral, and will then produce a large knife. It's unknown where the knives come from, as they're not present before the event and they disappear after. The funeral attendees will then use the knife on their wrists and sometimes throats, draining their blood into the coffin. Many lose more than enough blood to result in death, but none ever die from this, nor do they seem to feel any pain from their wounds. As the attendees take turns bleeding into the coffin, Cousin Johnny continues his eulogy, which eventually evolves into a cicada song, the kind sung by Linnaeus cicada males. The attendants sing the same song back to him in a kind of call and response. Cousin Johnny will then approach the coffin and vomit in a mixture of blood, wood pulp, and dead cicadas. The funeral will then proceed as normal, and the blood, vomit, and cicada-filled casket is then taken to the cemetery and buried. Black level events will usually end with the body being interred in the ground, but if there's a wake after the funeral, the horrors of the black level event will continue. At the wake, Cousin Johnny will climb on top of a table, lie down, and encourage the other attendants to devour him, which they do. All the while he continues to talk his nonsense, until there is nothing left. Much like blue and white level events, being in attendance leads to horrific after effects. All participants who experience this event will separate from their family through either suicide, moving, or divorce. Every individual present at the event will also find that they are no longer able to produce offspring, and couples present may also fall victim to incidences of domestic violence, often involving cannibalism, that usually leave one or both participants dead, while 6 out of 10 children involved will attempt to murder one or both of their parents before they turn 18. These black level events are so horrible for all involved that any members of the specialized Cousin Johnny mobile task forces that happen to witness such an event are treated with Class A amnestics before they are transferred to another task force or retire, to ensure that they don't have to live with the memories of what they saw. Prior to that, they are closely monitored for any strange or antisocial behavior to make sure they weren't affected by the event. And they aren't the only SCP Foundation staff at risk of having been impacted by Cousin Johnny. It is theorized that as many as a third of Catholic and Anglican D-Class personnel were involved in the Black Level event at some point, and were driven to madness and violence by their fateful brushes with this strange relative that no one knows. So next time you're at a baptism, or a wedding, or a funeral, stay vigilant. Keep an eye on the other guests, and always ask yourself, do you really have a Cousin Johnny?
What is the most dangerous thing you can imagine? An average person might say an apex predator or a violent killer. Meanwhile, a researcher working for the SCP Foundation might cite one of the XK-class end-of-the-world scenarios, like the release of the Devourer of Worlds, as the most dangerous thing they can imagine. But if you were to pose that question to an astrophysicist, ask what they think is the most dangerous thing they can imagine, then you're likely to get only one answer: a black hole. That area of space that pulls in anything and everything around it with its immense gravity, whether it's planets or asteroids or even light itself. Nothing can escape the pull of a black hole. Around every black hole is an area known as the event horizon, and once you go past this boundary, there is no going back. If you were aboard a spacecraft that ended up going past the event horizon of a black hole, you're essentially as doomed as anyone can possibly be. According to certain laws of quantum mechanics, black holes do have their own temperature, and will often emit what is known as Hawking radiation, named after the renowned physicist Stephen Hawking. Given that black holes absorb everything, they will also pull this radiation back into their own mass, shrinking as they gradually collapse in on themselves. As for what's inside a black hole, hard to say. Anything can be pulled into one, but nothing can exist within it. Or at least that's what the world's leading scientists will tell you.
Other theories have been floating around there on where black holes might lead. Perhaps they might be doorways into other universes and dimensions beyond our understanding. Or maybe black holes are gaps in the fabric of the space-time continuum, and falling through one might send you hurtling years into the future or even the past. And then, there's SCP-123, something that the Foundation keeps well guarded. SCP-123 consists of a gray geodesic sphere, meaning it is a shape comprised of various connected triangles, kind of like the Epcot Center. Built from an unknown material, the hollow sphere housing SCP-123 consists of 60 triangles, with empty spaces between that allow someone to view the center. Within it is what looks like a much smaller sphere, only around a single millimeter in diameter. This inner sphere is completely black all over, emitting zero light, and tests by Foundation researchers have revealed that this dark sphere will also not reflect light either. That's because SCP-123 is, as you may have guessed, a contained miniature black hole. Much like the larger black holes found throughout the solar system, the core of SCP-123 has a strong gravitational force, capable of gently pulling any objects that are within 3 meters of the outer geodesic sphere towards it. Any object resting against the surface of the outer sphere seems to become double its normal weight as it gets caught up in the powerful forces within. However, while the pull of the black hole is at least weakened somewhat by this outer layer, inside the casing, the strength of the black hole is dramatically increased. You would be smart to leave your keys, wallet, and phone in another room if you were approaching SCP-123, as any small object that can fit through the triangular gaps in the outer shell will be pulled into the black hole in the center. When brought close enough, solid objects will rapidly accelerate as they are snatched up by the force of the anomalous sphere, only for the object to vanish entirely from view as it's lost to the void within. According to tests conducted by Foundation research teams, the same occurs if liquid is ever poured through one of the outer sphere's gaps, and it will be sucked away into the black hole like water down a drain. Further observations made by the Foundation's researchers confirm that all light near SCP-123 curves towards the black sphere in the center. Interestingly, black holes cannot normally be seen or observed directly with the naked eye, due to them being able to pull in light. So instead, astronomers and astrophysicists will monitor changes in the area surrounding a suspected black hole for any notable changes. The miniature black hole of SCP-123 shares these light-bending properties, but also appears to be at least partially observable while contained within the outer geodesic shell. While the Foundation is still unsure as to what the outer sphere is made of, it seems to act as some sort of cage, keeping the black hole stable and secure. Otherwise, the cage itself, along with the entire planet outside it, would presumably be sucked into the center. In fact, research staff have even been able to roughly calculate the mass of the interior black sphere, and have determined that the cage surrounding it somehow reduces the gravitational effects of the black hole. SCP Foundation experts state that the black hole within SCP-123 currently has a mass of approximately 10 to the 29th power kilograms within the outer shell, but the cage's dampening effects may mean that the inner sphere's actual mass could be even higher. Under ordinary circumstances, a black hole with a 10 to the 29th power kilograms of mass would have a Schwarzschild radius of about 200 meters. Any professional astrophysicists in our audience will already be well aware that a Schwarzschild radius is the size of the black hole's event horizon. If you remember earlier, we mentioned that an event horizon is the area that surrounds a black hole, and going past this boundary means that you now have a one-way ticket into the black hole whether you like it or not. The fact that SCP-123 doesn't have such a large event horizon, and that only objects placed within the outer sphere are pulled in, shows that the only thing stopping the black hole absorbing everything around it, including all of us, is the cage it's currently held in. Nothing can escape the pull of a black hole. No solid matter, no liquids, not even light. However, in the case of SCP-123, it seems that there is at least one state of matter that this black hole is unable to absorb: gases. Even though gaseous matter is affected by the gravitational force of SCP-123, for some unknown reason gas cannot breach the gaps in the outer shell surrounding the black hole. The SCP Foundation is still studying why only solids and liquids may pass through the cage while gas cannot, but it's almost certainly for the best. After all, if SCP-123 could absorb gas and pull other elements into its mass, there would be little to stop it from sucking up all the oxygen surrounding it. Somehow, either by an intentional design or by the natural properties of the material it's crafted from, the cage around the inner sphere seems to protect the outside world from the miniature black hole. It prevents the entire planet's air as well as the rest of the planet itself from being pulled in and crushed, while also keeping the black hole at a far more manageable size. The two components of SCP-123 seem to behave in a symbiotic manner, acting together as one. When someone moves the outer cage, the black hole will follow and stay in a fixed position, hovering inside the center of the geodesic casing. Just what exactly makes both of SCP-123's parts behave in such a way has left even the Foundation's top researchers baffled. While a miniaturized black hole could potentially cause devastating damage, for now at least, SCP-123 doesn't pose much of a threat, as long as it remains contained by the SCP Foundation. Within the confines of the geodesic cage, the black hole itself is nearly harmless, only pulling in small objects. As a result, the Foundation has been able to securely keep SCP-123 inside one of their facilities. The contained miniature black hole is fastened to a sturdy table with the use of straps and chains. However, personnel are forbidden from affixing any hooks to the gaps in the outer casing, otherwise these run the risk of being dragged into the black hole's gravitational pull, potentially along with whatever the hooks were attached to. The Foundation's researchers monitor the black hole 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year. Devices for measuring the gravitational force of SCP-123 are placed within the same room the black hole is kept, but at a safe distance of 100 meters away. Staff are also instructed to never place objects within the outer shell of SCP-123, and are prohibited from inserting any objects through the gaps in the geodesic sphere unless an experiment is taking place. At all times, SCP-123 is to be treated with the utmost care, as if it was a fragile object. And for all the Foundation knows of the unidentified outer sphere, it could well be. If the cage containing the black hole was ever breached, anything within 200 meters would be pulled into the center of SCP-123, as all forms of nearby matter were absorbed. The black hole would begin to increase in size, pulling anything and everything into itself as it continued to grow. Before long, the entirety of planet Earth would be collapsing in on itself, all poured towards one single point until the planet fractured. Perhaps the SCP-123 black hole would release and then absorb enough Hawking radiation to seal itself, but by that point, the world as we know it would be gone. A true XK-class end-of-the-world scenario, with pretty much nothing the Foundation can do to stop it once it's already started. Even SCP-2000 would be worthless once it was sucked inside the miniature black hole. So when we say that SCP-123 needs to be handled with extreme care, we truly mean it. The fate of the world depends on it, meaning no one member of the Foundation should ever shake the sphere around or exert any kind of force onto it. During any transfers, SCP-123 is not to be transported over large bodies of water, in case it begins to pull the liquid into its center. Researchers working near and studying the miniature black hole even have to adhere to a strict dress code to avoid their clothes getting absorbed into the spatial anomaly. Any member of Foundation staff interacting with SCP-123 is instructed that they must wear tight-fitting clothing, so no straps or laces, no chains or other dangling jewelry, and long hair has to be tied back. Sounds a lot like a school uniform dress code, right? It might not be all that fashionable, but it's a small price to pay to avoid getting painfully pulled through the small triangular gaps in the outer shell into the black hole within. The only question left is, what do you do with a tiny, perpetually stable black hole? When left alone, SCP-123 doesn't really seem to have much of a purpose, but it's certainly good at getting rid of things, so well that you'd never ever see them again. The contained miniature black hole's gravitational force has led to some higher-ranking individuals in the SCP Foundation discussing SCP-123's potentially usefulness as a disposal unit. After all, nothing you'd throw into it would ever come back. However, the head researcher studying this phenomena is concerned about the structural integrity of the geodesic cage that the black hole is kept in. Anyone looking to dispose of something using SCP-123 must first get this doctor's approval to do so, or request a formal hearing with a Foundation higher-up. Otherwise, any interactions with the miniature black hole are restricted, with experiments still ongoing to determine how strong that outer cage is, and just how long it's going to hold for. Because if it ever breaks, trust us, you'll know.
What are those things? A member of the exploration team asks, pointing to hundreds of clear orbs. He begins moving towards the mysterious objects. Progress is slow. The bulky spacesuit is meant to withstand the planet's hostile conditions, but doesn't allow for much maneuverability. They look like canisters containing some sort of creature, the SCP agent says. Dr. Sanders points his headlamp in the direction of the voice. Mother of God, he whispers into his helmet. Stop moving, he yells. Are those eggs? Nothing is supposed to be able to survive on this planet. That's why it was chosen for off-world testing and containment for the Foundation's deadliest entities. The team points their lights at the orbs. The creatures inside don't seem to be moving. They are suspended in some type of gel, and when the light hits them, the creatures look like metallic squids. Dr. Sanders holds up his hand to signal the rest of the team to stop moving. I thought I saw some activity, he says. The team looks around, but they don't see anything. I must be jumping at shadows. Grab the equipment, let's get out of here. We need to contact SCP Command and find out what they want us to do with these things. The team packs up their gear and makes their way out of the cave system beneath the alien planet's surface. As they exit the mouth of the cave, they are greeted by a nighttime sky filled with stars and nebula. The undesignated planet is located in the deep recesses of space. The only light on this part of the planet comes from the suits of Dr. Sanders' team. Without any light pollution like on Earth, it seems as if every part of the universe is visible. If it wasn't so creepy here, it'd be kind of beautiful, one of the team members says. All of the SCP agents have stopped walking and stare up at the cosmos. Come on, says Dr. Sanders. Let's get back to Elena and find out what the O5 Council wants us to do with this new discovery. The next night, the exploration team is back at the caverns, where they discovered the mysterious orbs the previous evening. Dr. Sanders leads his team into the winding tunnel system. It leads directly under one of the largest mountain ranges on the planet. They approach the chamber that contains the clear orbs and get to work collecting samples to bring back to the lab. We have no idea what these things actually are, so be careful. If you see movement, immediately back away. I want teams of 2 for each pod. One person collects the sample, the other holds the incinerator at the ready, just in case you need to fry whatever is inside these things. The team members confirm their orders and get to work. Everything goes according to plan. The samples are gathered, and the SCP team makes its way out of the caverns. When they get to the surface, Dr. Sanders radios to the command center at Elena. We're out from under the mountain. Canisters have been secured. Estimated time to the rover is 4 minutes. We'll update when en route to base. Roger that, extraction team. We'll have the loading bay ready for your arrival, responds the communications officer at Elena. Sanders and his crew board the rover and put the canisters in the storage compartment. The drive back to Elena is uneventful. The entire planet is basically made up of dust and rocks. Until yesterday, everyone at Elena thought they were the only living things out here, other than the few dangerous SCPs they brought along with them to experiment on. The rover pulls into the research base and parks outside the airlock. The team carries the canisters into the storage dome for further analysis before heading to decontamination. Sanders walks out of the airlock and takes off his helmet. Breen! We brought back the orbs, and they're awaiting your analysis in the storage bay. I don't know what they are, but the fact that they might be alive will be of great interest to the Foundation. I look forward to examining the specimens. We're kind of backed up right now, but we'll get around to it. You know, saving the best for last and all, Researcher Breen responds. There's a delicate matter that we're attending to at the moment. It should be resolved soon. Breen looks down at the clipboard he's holding and frowns. I've got to go, but I'll keep you updated. After a few days, Breen calls Dr. Sanders into his lab. You're going to want to see this. It's those weird egg-type specimens you brought back from the caverns. They've been designated SCP-1124. Perfect, I've been dying to know what these things are, Sanders says as he enters the lab. Do you mind if I record this, just so I have something to send back to my superiors at the Foundation? Breen agrees, and the 2 SCP researchers begin their analysis of the clear orbs. So, they're not made of glass like we originally thought, Breen begins.
We actually aren't entirely sure what these things are made of. They definitely have the shape of an egg, but the solid, clear outer layer makes me think they are more like carrying containers than anything else. See? Look. Bree grabs the top of one of the orbs and pulls it off. There is a satisfying pop, like a champagne cork exploding out of the top of a bottle. Dr. Sanders looks at the lid and then watches as Breen puts the top back on the orb. But that's not the weirdest part, Breen says. Take a look at what's inside. Sanders leans over the opened orb and looks into it. The creature inside looks like a silver squid. It does not move, but Sanders gets an uneasy feeling, as if there is something inherently dangerous and evil about the metallic squids. Come over here. I have some laid out on the table for you to examine, says Breen. They walk over to another lab bench where there are several creatures laid out. Breen uses forceps to move the appendage of one of the creatures. The limbs are segmented, but there is no sign of eyes or a mouth, as far as Sanders can tell. What are they? Asks Sanders. No idea, but watch this. Breen picks up one of the creatures with the forceps by the tentacle. Sanders expects the arm to be flexible and rubbery like a squid's, but instead they are stiff and rigid like a knife. When Breen picks up the limb, the entire creature moves with it like a statue. He pulls out a scalpel and looks at Dr. Sanders. Watch this, he says. Nothing happens as Breen presses the blade against SCP-1124's exoskeleton. He pushes harder and harder and harder. Eventually, the scalpel breaks, and the blade clangs to the floor. We haven't been able to break the shell, so we don't know exactly what's inside. But I have a few ideas on how to crack this puppy open, Breen says with a smile. He pulls out a blowtorch and begins blasting the metallic squid with the flame. There is no effect. Breen then brings out a vat of liquid nitrogen. He picks up one of the creatures and places it inside the canister. When he pulls it out, the instance of SCP-1124 is covered in frost. Breen grabs a hammer off of one of the lab tables and smashes it down onto the shell. There's a clank as if the hammer struck a metal pole. Breen shakes his hand, which is now throbbing from the reverberations sent through the hammer on impact. Maybe they aren't alive after all, chuckles Dr. Sanders. Maybe they're just figurines or statues or something. That's what I was starting to think too, replies Breen. Ugh, what a waste of time, Sanders says. He hawks a loogie and spits at SCP-1124 in disgust. The spit hits the outer shell and slowly begins to run down the side. Dr. Sanders and Breen take a seat at one of the tables. It seemed like those things were going to hold some real promise. Maybe even get us off this rock. Yes, the orbs and whatever is inside of them are real duds, Breen commiserates. Guess it's time to focus on... Suddenly, one of the arms of the creatures that Dr. Sanders spat on begins to move. Did you see that? Breen yells. The squid thing, it just moved its arm! Breen and Sanders run to the lab table, where the instance of SCP-1124 slowly stretches its tentacles, as if feeling its surroundings to get a better idea of its location. Breen reaches out to touch one of the metallic arms. Stop! Don't touch it! Dr. Sanders yells, but it's too late. The creature makes contact with Breen's skin. It instantly comes alive. All of its tentacles are now moving freely. The ends have sharpened tips. The creature jerks one of its tentacles, slashing Breen's neck. Blood spatters across the room, covering several other instances of SCP-1124. As the blood touches them, they slowly come to life. Their tentacles move all around as if searching for the source of the bodily fluid. Dr. Sanders shrieks for help. He sprints towards the door, but before he can reach it, one of the instances of SCP-1124 launches itself off of a table and impales its spiked arms into Sanders' back. He screams in pain. Tears fall down the sides of his cheek as his hand slams against the glass door that leads out of the lab. The creature climbs up his back and over his head. It then pries Dr. Sanders' mouth open and squirms down his throat. As he is torn apart from the inside by the metal tentacles of SCP-1124, his hand slides down the door, leaving a bloody handprint. The audio recorder continues to run in the lab. It picks up the unsettling sounds of metal on metal and the guttural screeches of the SCP-1124 creatures. The glass door leading from the lab to the rest of the Elena facility shatters. Instances of SCP-1124 come streaming out. The researchers at the base have no idea that one of the most dangerous SCPs the Foundation has ever faced is now squirming along the halls of the facility, looking for hosts to lay their eggs inside. Years go by without any communication from Elena. The Foundation assumes something has gone wrong, but that was the point of setting up the base on a faraway planet in the first place. If an experiment got out of hand, or a dangerous SCP escaped, The only people who would be in danger were the agents and Class D personnel at Elena. It was a much safer alternative to conducting these sorts of experiments on Earth. The O5 Council redacts much of the information on Elena and the research happening there. The file is buried deep within the Foundation's database and forgotten. That is, until several years later, when a ship from Elena crash lands just outside an Air Force base in Nevada.
General, we've just received word from the Foundation that one of our deep space research vessels has crashed in the desert not too far from here. The O5 Council has asked that we send a team to recover whatever is on board. Apparently, it came from a base called Elena.
Never heard of it,
responds the General. All right, let's send a task force to go retrieve whatever is on board that thing.
A group of SCP scientists and agents are dispatched to carry out reconnaissance and containment procedures for the crashed Elena rocket. There is very little information on what to expect, as most of the reports and documents about Elena are classified. As the team sets out to recover whatever is on board the rocket, a reptile-like creature that has remained dormant at the base for the last 30 years twitches. No one notices the slight movement, even though this SCP is heavily guarded and deemed one of the biggest threats to humanity's very existence.
General, we've reached the crash site.
One of the agents radios back to the airbase.
The rocket is in rough shape, but the cargo hold seems to be intact. We're opening it now.
The extraction team uses welding torches to cut through the outer lock of the capsule. They pull back the door and peer inside.
What are those things?
One of the agents asks. As the flashlight moves across the cargo hold, the team can see hundreds of glassy orbs packed tightly into the space within the rocket.
Well, let's get them back to the base so they can be analyzed,
says the team leader. Using recommended containment procedures, the extraction team carefully removes each of the orbs and loads them onto a transport helicopter. All of the agents wear protective hazmat suits, and no one is allowed to directly come into contact with the orbs. Once the helicopter is loaded, it takes off and returns to the Air Force Base. The chopper lands, and a team of researchers load the orb into a containment pod, which is then immediately brought to the lab for analysis. I finally found some information on what Elena was and what these things might be. The lead scientist at the base informs the other researchers. It took a lot of digging, but I'm pretty sure the orbs are classified as SCP-1124. As far as I can tell, they contain some kind of squid-like statue, but the information from Elena is kind of spotty. Not exactly sure what happened up there. The other researchers listen as they're briefed. We're pretty much starting from scratch here, so be careful and use proper containment procedures as if you're dealing with an unknown SCP, the lead scientist finishes. The researchers nod to indicate they've heard what their bosses had to say, and then get to work. Deep underground, the reptilian creature still lies dormant. There are slight fluctuations in the thermal readings in its containment chamber, but the beast does not seem to wake. The SCP agents on duty note in their log that the thermal sensors might need to be recalibrated. The researchers enter a clean room and lock themselves inside. They have brought in one of the SCP-1124 orbs for further analysis. As the researcher who is holding the orb walks towards the table in the middle of the room, he accidentally trips. The other researcher reaches out and tries to grab his colleague but misses. The orb falls to the ground. The researcher scrapes his leg on the corner of the table. He doesn't notice the tear in his protective suit, where a small trickle of blood drips onto the floor.
Oh, that really hurt,
the researcher says, rubbing his shin. The orb rolls in a circle on the ground. It slowly comes to a stop right on top of a drop of blood from the injured researcher. The orb begins to shudder. Both of the scientists look in shock as it rolls along the floor, banging into the containment chamber walls as if it was looking for a way out. The researchers jump to their feet and run after the orb. One of the scientists grabs the orb off the ground and holds it tightly in both hands. Suddenly, a hole appears in the orb's surface. The researcher looks at one another, their eyes wide in terror. The researcher holding the orb puts his hand over the hole to cover it. He instantly recoils in pain as something stabs him from within. A metallic tentacle appears through the hole in the orb, followed by a creature with a squid-like body. The creature remains motionless, sensing the room around him. The scientist not holding the orb races towards the storage closet to find something to cover the hole with. The other researcher remains motionless, hoping that the creature will just go back into its container. Without warning, the creature launches itself at the faceplate of the researcher holding the orb. It smashes through the protective shielding and enters the mouth of the researcher. The other scientist screams in terror. He runs out of the containment chamber and slams down the button to activate the failsafe to prevent a containment breach. The room begins to fill with mist and trifilic acid. Alarms sound in the lab. Other SCP personnel come rushing in. They watch in horror as the head of the researcher with SCP-1124 inside of him starts to expand. Blood begins to pour out of his nose, eyes, and ears. Then, with a gruesome pop, the researcher's head explodes. The researchers lean closer to the window to get a better look at what's happening. They scan the room when suddenly an instance of SCP-1124 slams into the observation glass. The researchers jump back in surprise. A crack runs the length of the observation window. At the same time, the alarms are going off in the research lab. Different alarms sound deep within the facility. Sensors have picked up a huge jump in thermal energy in the reptilian creature's chamber, along with the movement of its tail and limbs. Armed SCP Foundation agents run towards the containment chamber, but when they are only a few feet away, the blast door is forced off its hinges and slams against the far wall of the complex. The containment team screeches to a halt as SCP-682 slowly lumbers out of its cell and shakes its body. The creature locks eyes with the agents, who are frozen in shock. It curls back its lips to reveal razor-sharp teeth. Saliva falls to the floor. "Open fire!" one of the agents yells. They fire a barrage of bullets at SCP-682, but they seem to have no effect. The creature stalks towards the agents and uses its claws and teeth to tear them apart. SCP-682 runs through the facility, killing every living thing in its path. It bursts out into the sunlight, where it sniffs the air. It then sprints towards the high-density fence and bursts through it as if it was nothing more than cobwebs. SCP-682 runs in the direction of the crashed Elena rocket. A battalion of agents is deployed to stop SCP-682, but the monster quickly destroys anyone and anything in its path. It seems to be on a mission, and nothing will stop it. When SCP-682 reaches the rocket, it consumes the entire research team that is there examining the spacecraft. It then begins sniffing around the area and climbs into the cargo hold. It's looking for something. Mobile Task Force Iota-5 approaches the rocket in two teams. The first is on the ground in armored vehicles. The second is in a helicopter. They have a plan. It seems that SCP-682 is looking for the orbs that were inside the rocket. For some reason, they are incredibly important to SCP-682, and it will stop at nothing to find them. SCP-682 is acting like a mother searching for a lost child. Mobile Task Force Iota-5 has brought one of the SCP-1124 orbs with them in hopes they can lure SCP-682 back to its containment chamber. When the first team approaches in the chopper, SCP-682 stops its search. The creature sniffs the air and spots the helicopter. "Uh-oh, I think he spotted us," says the pilot. The ground force opens fire on SCP-682, but the creature does not seem interested in them. Instead, SCP-682 remains fixated on the helicopter, as if it knows there is an orb on board. The creature leaps off the rocket and begins running towards the helicopter. The pilot turns the chopper and flies away with SCP-682 in pursuit. They make it back to the Air Force Base, just ahead of SCP-682. One of the agents jumps out of the helicopter with the SCP-1124 orb in his hands. He races towards a mobile containment chamber, where he places the orb at the far end before turning to get out. When he looks up, SCP-682 is standing in the doorway. Its chest heaves up and down. Its eyes are wild. The SCP agent raises his gun and fires. SCP-682 snarls and leaps into the containment chamber. The whole thing shakes as the agent is torn apart. His gunshots and screams are silenced as the door to the containment chamber shuts. The fiasco known as the Grey Dragon Incident is an embarrassment to the Foundation. The O5 Council has everyone involved terminated. SCP-682 is secured in a new containment facility far away from SCP-1124, and the mysterious orbs are placed in their own containment chamber and hidden away from the world. The working hypothesis is that SCP-1124 are the eggs of SCP-682, but further tests will need to be done. And since both of these SCPs are extremely dangerous, these experiments might need to be conducted on a faraway planet. Perhaps it is time for the SCP Foundation to revisit Elena once again. Let's just hope this time they don't bring anything else back. An elderly woman watches from her living room window as heavy sheets of rain fall outside. She rocks back and forth in her chair nervously.
"It's been raining for days. The road is washed out. I can't get into town. Oh, what am I to do? What am I to do?"
she says out loud to herself. The rocking chair creaks under her weight.
but not as much as it had 3 days ago, before she ran out of food. I am so hungry, the old lady moans.
She glances at the door that leads to her basement.
Maybe I can find something to eat down there.
She stands up. Her 90-year-old bones creak as she slowly shuffles towards the basement door. The empty chair rocks back and forth from the old woman's momentum, as if someone is still sitting in it. She opens the door and looks into the pitch-black darkness. There are no windows down there. The only light is connected to a drawstring in the middle of the room. The old woman slowly makes her way down the uneven wooden steps. When she reaches the bottom, she reaches out her wrinkled hand, groping in the darkness for the drawstring. Her hand brushes something. It feels like sticky yarn. Then she feels the legs of a spider scurry up her arm. The old woman lets out a shriek as her hand locates the string and she pulls hard. The light flickers on. It creates a dim glow, but at least she can now see what's in the basement. The string swings back and forth, casting a snake-like shadow on the far wall. The old woman scans the floor for anything to eat. A leftover tuna can, some pickled vegetables, a rat. Anything will do at this point. There is nothing there. The old woman feels her strength has been almost completely drained. She doesn't know how she'll make it back up the stairs. In desperation, she looks around the basement one last time. Her eyes fall on an old rusty saw. She pauses for a moment.
I need to eat,
she whispers. The old woman slowly walks towards the saw. She picks it up and examines it.
God gave me 2 hands for a reason,
she says, her eyes locked on the rusty blade. She places one hand on the wooden workbench that sits against the wall and grips the saw tightly with the other. The old woman takes a deep breath and brings the saw down towards her hand. Where are we going? D94322 asks the SCP agent driving the car. House on Hadley Hill, the agent responds. Well, that doesn't sound creepy at all, D94322 says as he cranes his neck to get a glimpse of the top of the mountain through the SUV window. Why don't we just play the quiet game until we get there, the agent says as he focuses on the pothole-ridden back roads of Mount Zion, Georgia. D94322 holds on tightly to the handhold above him to keep his body from slamming into the door every time they go over a big bump. They continue on for a few more minutes when a rundown house comes into view. The agent pulls off the road and stops the SUV. Here you go, he says, handing D94322 an earpiece. What am I supposed to do with this? D94322 asks. Just stick it in your ear, the agent says with just a little contempt in his voice. You don't have to be rude about it, D94322 replies as he grabs the earbud and sticks it in his ear. Hello, testing, anybody out there? Hello, D94322. Can you hear me? Says a voice in his head. Yeah. You can just call me D94 for short. D94322 is kind of a mouthful. Very well. The voice from the earbud agrees. My name is Dr. Andrews. I will be walking you through this test with SCP-4173. Alright, Doc, shall we get this party started? D94 says as he steps out of the SUV. He looks up at the house that sits atop Hadley Hill. The sky is dark, and clouds race over the mountain, as if they would rather be anywhere else but here. Here we go. D94 starts walking up the slippery hill, being careful not to fall. He reaches the overgrown walkway leading up to the house and pauses. Is there a problem? Dr. Andrews asks. No, just trying to psych myself up to go into this creepy house, responds D94. What's inside anyways? That is not your concern at the moment. But if you do exactly as I tell you, you should be in and out in no time. Whatever you say, Doc. D94 walks down the path, reaches his hand out, and grips the cool brass knob. He turns it and pushes the door open. The inside of the house smells like mothballs and decay. All right, I'm in, he says. Good. Head down the hallway and turn to your left. You'll see a door that leads to the basement. Let me know when you're there. D94 walks down the hallway. The old wooden floor groans under his feet. He reaches the basement door. It's slightly ajar. Ugh, this place gives me the creeps. Rightfully so, Dr. Andrews chimes in. It is an old spooky house on top of an old spooky hill in the middle of nowhere. Obviously, it's going to be creepy. An old woman died here under mysterious circumstances around 20 years ago, but you don't really need to worry about that. No ghosts here, I think. You think?
D94 shouts as he takes a step away from the basement door. I'm just kidding. There's nothing but harmless old SCP-4173 in that house. And when has an SCP ever hurt anyone, right? There is a long, uncomfortable pause. Anyways, why don't you head on downstairs so we can get you out of there as soon as possible? Yeah, sure, D94 says as he begins his descent into the darkness. I can't see anything. Is there a light? No, I think it burnt out years ago. But that's okay, I can guide you. It's what I'm here for, says Dr. Andrews. Walk towards the east wall, but watch your head. The ceiling is low in that corner. You'll see what you're looking for when you get there. D94 is silent for a moment. East? He asks. Turn left, Dr. Andrews responds. Oh, alright, why didn't you say so, Doc? D94 turns left and walks forward. After a few feet, there's a loud bang as he slams his head into the ceiling. Son of a bitch! I told you to watch your head. Yeah, thanks, says D94 as he rubs the bump forming beneath his hair. This place is even spookier than the first floor. You know that, right? I promise there's nothing in that room right now that can hurt you, Dr. Andrews reassures D94. Wait, what do you mean right now? Don't worry about it. Just let me know when you reach the wall, D94. After a few seconds, D94's eyes adjust to the darkness. He can just make out the damp concrete wall in front of him. It looks as if the wall is perspiring. I'm here, he says. Good. There's a little door, maybe 5 feet to your left. You see it? Asks Dr. Andrews. D94 turns. Yeah, I see it. It's closed. The door itself is not very big, maybe a foot long and a half a foot wide. Open it, says Dr. Andrew. D94 hesitates. What's in there? Nothing, just open it. Dr. Andrews repeats himself. No way, man, you're lying, and I'm not opening anything until you tell me what's on the other side of that door. Dr. Andrews sighs. We both know that you're going to do as I say, D94322. You have no other choice, unless you want to go back to that death row cell block where we found you. D94 shakes his head and rubs the bridge of his nose. Fine, he says. Dr. Andrews can hear the squeaking of hinges through the microphone on D94's earbud. It's open, now what? Do you see anything? No. There's some cobwebs and dirt, but other than that, it's just dark. D94 thinks for a moment. Why is this little door here? Is this some, pet door or something? You have to be, I don't know, pretty small to get in there. Agreed. Just hang tight and let me know when you hear something. We won't keep you there for long. Hear something? Like what? Asks D94. You'll know when you hear it, says Dr. Andrews. 5 minutes go by without a sound. Then 10, 15. The basement is damp and cold. D94 thinks he sees creatures scurrying around the floor, but he doesn't say anything because acknowledging them makes his situation more real and a lot more scary. After a half hour of waiting in silence, D94 screams, What the heck was that? What was what? Dr. Andrews is startled out of a daydream by the shouts of D94 in his ear. Something just moved past the door. I definitely saw it. What in God's name was that? Yells D94. Dr. Andrews tries to remain calm, but he can barely contain his excitement. The entity in the wall is why you're down there. What do you mean? You said there wasn't anything down here. I said there was nothing down there that could hurt you. If you follow my instructions, this will continue to be true. Can you hear anything? Asks Dr. Andrews. No, I can't hear it. But before D94 can finish his sentence, a voice speaks from behind the wall. He can't understand what the voice is saying at first, but as his heart begins to slow and the blood stops thumping in his ears, D94 can make out her words. Oh, thank goodness. I wasn't sure you'd be able to find me. What took you so long? Says the voice of an old woman. D94 takes a step back from the door. There's someone on the other side of that wall? He hisses into the microphone at Dr. Andrews. Tell it that the road is out, and you had to find another way up, says Dr. Andrews in D94's earpiece. What? Why? Just do it if you want to get out of there, D94. Dr. Andrews says a little impatiently. The road is out, so I had to find another way up, says D94 to the little open door in the wall. Oh, yes, the rain washed it out. I was worried I wouldn't ever get to see another person again being stuck up here and all. Can you see me? Asks the voice. No, I can't, says D94. Doc, what is on the other side of that wall?
Come over here a little closer. I can't see you properly either, says the voice.
It's fine, you can get closer, just don't touch the door.
Dr. Andrews says,
I really don't want to do that, says D94. Do it, and you will be that much closer to getting out. I hate you, whispers D94.
He slowly approaches the little door and speaks into it. Hello?
Oh, there you are.
The voice pauses as if whoever is speaking is examining D94.
I'm sorry, I can't see like I used to. It's so dark in here and it's been so long. Reach through the door and let me feel your hand so I can tell you're really there.
What? D94 steps away from the door. No way am I putting my hand in there.
Come on now, don't be rude. I just want to feel that you're there. It's been so long. Just a touch.
The voice says a little harsher than before. Screw you, lady. I'm not getting my hands anywhere near this creepy hole in the wall, says D94. He turns around and starts walking away from the little door towards the staircase leading back to the main level of the house. Before he can put his foot on the first step, D94 hears Dr. Andrews' voice screaming in his ear. Stop moving! Look, you're going to have to do it. We haven't been able to recover anyone who refuses to do what she asks. I cannot guarantee your safety unless you put your hand through that door. Are you kidding me? Shouts D94. You're telling me that sweet, creepy old lady will somehow kill me if I don't do what she asks? We're not entirely sure what happens, but you need to put your hand through that door if you want to get out of there, says Dr. Andrews. D94 turns back toward the little door and slowly approaches it.
This is my nightmare,
he says more to himself than anyone else. He reaches out slowly and puts his fingers through the doorway. He immediately pulls them back and steps away from the door.
I really don't want to do this,
D94 whispers. He steps forward again and sticks his hand all the way through the doorway. For a moment, nothing happens. All right, I've got my hand in there. Now what?
Oh, I can see you now. You're right there. Thank you for coming. Oh, it's been so long since someone came. And with a gift as well? Oh, sweetling, you're so kind to me.
Gift? What gift? D94 asks nervously.
It's so dark and lonesome, and I've just been so hungry for such a long time. Thank you, sweetling. I'll take your gift from you. You are such a rude little brat. You don't really deserve it. You've had it for too long, and you don't deserve it. It's mine now. Mine for my belly. Thank you.
What are you talking about, you psycho? D94 stutters. Suddenly, something grabs his hand and pulls him against the wall. He screams in agony as Dr. Andrews hears a wet, ripping sound coming through the microphone. It sounds as if some type of metal instrument is cutting through flesh.
Oh, God! No! Help me! Help me!
D94 screams.
Please, please, please.
Dr. Andrews hears the sound of D94's body hitting the floor as he passes out. It's quiet for a moment.
Don't worry, you ungrateful child. Don't worry. I'll fill you up too. You can have mine. I'll give it to you, sweet boy. Good boy, fill you up,
says the old woman's voice from the other side of the wall. Dr. Andrews listens as the hinges of the little door squeak and it clicks shut. He picks up the phone next to him and dials it. Go in and get him. Bring him back to Site 94 for observation. And try to keep this one alive, please. He hangs up the phone and prepares the lab for D94322 to be brought in. D94 slowly comes out of his medically induced coma 2 days after the incident with SCP-4173. He's stable, but doesn't feel great, and he can't help but sense that something is different. D94 looks at where his hand should be. There's nothing there. That crazy old lady ate my hand! He starts screaming. A medical team rushes in as red lights begin to flash and sirens blare. They attempt to restrain D94. During the struggle, D94 catches a glimpse of himself in a mirror on the far side of the room. He stops fighting for a moment. There is a growth expanding from his head. What the heck is that? He yells, pointing to his reflection. D94 begins to struggle again, this time much more intensely. He begins scratching at the growth on the side of his head without much success. In the process, he pushes the growth further into his skull. It penetrates his brain. D94 blacks out. The medical team ties D94 to the bed and tries to get a reading on his vitals. The growth is putting too much pressure on his brain. They rush him to the ER, but D94322 dies before he reaches the operating table. Dr. Andrews stands over the body of the deceased Class D subject. Cut him open. he says to the doctors standing in the room. One of them pulls out a scalpel and makes an incision into the side of D94's head. "What is that?" one of the doctors says. The other bends over to get a better look. After a moment, he turns away and vomits into his face mask. Dr. Andrews picks up a pair of forceps off the table. He sticks them deep into the hole in the side of D94's head and clamps down hard. Dr. Andrews pulls out a decomposing hand. The fingers are still moving, as if trying to grab onto something. There is no explanation for how it got in there, but it is obvious that SCP-4173 played some sort of role in the phenomenon. Dr. Andrews goes back into his office to review previous case files on SCP-4173. Everyone who had put their hand into the small doorway has been pulled towards the wall and had their hand chopped off. The severed appendage never ends up being a clean cut, which leads Dr. Andrews to hypothesize the gruesome makeshift operation is done with some sort of tool with teeth. Once the hand of the victim is severed, SCP-4173 always thanks the person for their gift. She then informs them not to worry about their hand, as it will be replaced. But then something incredibly strange happens. Like with D94, a decaying hand will appear somewhere in the body, but it isn't always inside the head. In fact, depending on how polite the test subject is to the old woman behind the door, the closer to the wrist the decaying hand actually ends up. For the test subjects who are rude to the old lady, the decaying hand ends up in some pretty interesting places. "She really hated D94322, chuckles Dr. Andrews to himself. Dr. Andrews continues flipping to the back of the file on SCP-4173. The SCP Foundation doesn't quite know how it happens, but people who refuse to offer their hand to SCP-4173 suffer a worse fate than those who surrender to the old lady. In every case where a subject tries to get away from the small door, some inexplicable force seems to grab them from behind and drag them through the tiny opening. In these cases, there is nothing left of the test subject. It is likely fatal, as a human is much smaller than the opening itself, so the only way a body could fit through the doorway is if every bone is broken and every muscle compressed to a quarter of its actual size. "I'm not sure which is worse," Dr. Andrews says aloud as he closes the file on SCP-4173. He glances at the picture paperclip to the front of the manila folder depicting the tiny doorway. He can't quite pinpoint why, but the fact that the door slowly closes after the old woman gets what she needs from her victims sends chills down his spine. The words of the old woman echo in his head. "Don't worry, I'll fill you up too. You can have mine. I'll give it to you. Sweet boy, good boy, fill you up."
Russell's back was pressed against the wall, his shuddering hands gripping the fire axe. The low emergency lighting filling the corridor indicated the lockdown was still in effect, although that was simultaneously a blessing and a curse. Sure, it meant that thing couldn't get out, hopefully, but it also meant that Russell was stuck in the wing of the facility with it. He had no idea if anyone else was left. He hadn't seen what had happened to Carpenter. Maybe it got him, or perhaps he had managed to give it the slip at the last second. There was no way of knowing for sure. It had all started so simply, so innocently, and with such noble intentions. If he had known it would lead to all this madness, Russell would have never put his name down on the request form. The SCP Foundation had been working on a way to neutralize or cure SCP-610 for what felt like forever. To one team of scientists, the infamously so-called flesh that hates was a fascinating organism. It was a highly contagious sarkic skin disease, isolated entirely within a small area of Siberia. That on its own wasn't enough to pique the interest of the research team led by Dr. Carpenter, including his hand-picked star researchers Russell and David, along with their assistant Clennon and Dr. Botten, an expert on infectious diseases who had recently joined their efforts to provide his specialist knowledge. What did captivate all of them, however, was what SCP-610 did when it infected a human being. The disease would trigger aggressive and uncontrollable mutations within its infected and could virtually rewrite their entire physiology in a heartbeat. The flesh that hates was capable of transforming a person's body into a horrifying fleshy mass of limbs and matter that barely resembled a human being anymore. And in addition, the infected individuals would retain some level of awareness,
attacking any uninfected person with extreme hostility. There had long been chatter amongst some other research teams studying SCP-610 about devising a way to weaponize the disease. If they could somehow create a variant that didn't turn people into monsters, or at least cause the fleshy abominations to die shortly after mutation, then the Foundation or another interested party could deploy the flesh that hates as a biological weapon. Dr. Carpenter had long abhorred the idea, instead searching for a way to completely reverse the effects of an SCP-610 infection. It may have been idealistic, perhaps even naive by some standards, but the rest of his team was behind him in the pursuit of that noble goal, although not one of them knew it would soon cost them their lives. Hitting speed bump after speed bump in their research, the team were beginning to lose hope. Researcher David was the most outspoken in how tired he was of seeing the same results, yelling in frustration that the flesh could not be cured by conventional means. However, it was that outburst that gave Russell the idea. They had tried treating SCP-610 like a common virus, as if it was any other form of disease, largely thanks to Dr. Botton's input. And granted, that approach had taught them a lot about the flesh's ability to contaminate a subject from a single cell. But this infection was anomalous through and through. Could the solution to eradicating it for good lie not in a medical cure, but in another SCP? Russell brought this hypothesis to the rest of the research team, and each of them had suggestions for other anomalies they could potentially use to cure a subject of the flesh that hates. "We could get SCP-049 to take a look at the infected patient," Clennon suggested.
"Oh, might work," Carpenter mused. "Although even if he cures someone, he might also kill them. He has his whole deal about ridding the world of the pestilence could prove to be a problem."
There's always 682, David said dryly. "Have the reptile eat up all the SCP-610 infectees and voila, problem solved." "Oh, real helpful, David," Researcher Russell retorted. "And what are we gonna do when SCP-682 adapts to the flesh? You really want an infected immortal lizard on the loose?"
"Gentlemen, please," Dr. Botton spoke up. "We're forgetting one obvious option. I propose we submit a joint formal request to use SCP-914 for this experiment." Unanimously, the group all agreed that this was the best course of action. SCP-914, or the Clockworks, was a giant machine with two booths marked Input and Output. Although the Foundation still couldn't fully comprehend exactly how SCP-914 seemed to take any object placed within it and disassemble, recreate, improve, or destroy the item depending on its current setting. There was one issue, however. A prior failed experiment wherein a D-class was placed in SCP-914 had led to some pretty disastrous consequences. As a result, ever since, no organic matter was to be placed within the Clockworks, a rule that the team's experiment with the flesh would breach. Still, they pressed on, each of the 5 researchers signing their request to utilize SCP-914 before it was submitted to the Foundation higher-ups. Within hours, the request was denied, but the team was determined that SCP-914 could be the key to solving the Foundation's long-standing issue with SCP-610. Dr. Carpenter repealed the decision, urging the higher-ups to reconsider. He argued that this flouting of the no organic matter rule was necessary to potentially rid the world of the flesh that hates. After a few days of consideration, the request was finally, fatefully, granted. The team went to work immediately, requisitioning 2 test subjects, both of which had suffered SCP-610 infections and were horribly mutated. The pair of them were deemed a potential hazard to every member of Foundation staff on site, and as a result, the entire wing of the facility where the Clockworks was housed had to be evacuated for safety. Dressed in biohazard suits to protect themselves, the researchers used an electric cattle prod to coax the first flesh specimen into the input chamber of SCP-914. This was the test run. They wanted to see if the Clockworks would actually be able to affect those infected with SCP-610 at all. Plus, they needed a failsafe just in case something went wrong, and luckily the machine had just the thing. Russell asked Clennon to set the Clockworks to rough, and with a click and whir of its numerous gears and gyros, SCP-914 came to life. Instantly, the infected test subject was completely obliterated. The setting had reduced it to atoms, disintegrating it on such a microscopic level that there was nothing left in the output chamber. The second infected creature seemed to bristle with anger, but didn't attack or become aggressive, as it too was prodded towards the Clockworks. Next, perhaps out of fear that their theory might be wrong,
The team agreed to set SCP-914 to its 1-to-1 setting. Sure enough, the machine recreated another instance of a specimen infected with the flesh that hates, replacing the previous one. "We all know we're stalling," researcher David piped up. "Let's do what we came here for. Set the clockworks to course." Nervously receiving a nod from Dr. Carpenter, Clennon stepped forward to switch the dial on SCP-914 to the course setting. This was the primary reason the team had all agreed to use the machine on a flesh specimen. This setting could disassemble any item placed in the input booth, separating it into its base components. Botten had suggested the use of SCP-914 based on the theory that, if it worked correctly, the clockworks could extract the flesh that hates from its infected host, rendering them free of the disease. The machine made a colossal amount of noise as Clennon hurried back to a safe distance with the others. But as it was powering up, seconds from activating, Dr. Carpenter noticed something. The color drained from his face as he saw it. None of the others had noticed from a distance that the dial hadn't been set to coarse. Instead, it pointed to very fine, the highest refinement setting 914 had.
What the hell have you done?
Carpenter yelled at Clennon before the machine suddenly activated. What stepped free from the output booth stunned the researcher. It was a man, a seemingly ordinary human, who had presumably been infected by SCP-610 some time ago. He stepped nervously out of the machine, looking confused for a moment as a pair of Foundation security guards cautiously approached him. "We did it," Russell said in awe. Suddenly, fleshy tendrils burst forth from the man's arms, latching on to the approaching guards. They screamed in agony, their bodies melting become a bloody, misshapen mass that stayed attached to the humanoid creature at the center. It was like they became a part of it, the guards' arms and legs forming additional limbs as their forms were reconstituted and repurposed as part of a monster that was now crawling on its 6 legs towards the research team. In a blind panic, the group scrambled for the entrance, the head of the infected man splitting open down the middle, opening up into a wide, snapping pair of jaws. Panting hard as he ran, his breath fogging up the clear faceplate of the biohazard suit, Russell ran through the door, hearing someone close behind. He stopped for a moment, looking back to see the creature on the other side of the door, starting to spill through the doorframe like a liquid. Running faster around a corner, Russell came to another halt in the common area. A third security guard following just before a thick steel security door came slamming down, sealing the creature on the other side.
The other door didn't hold it. What good is that going to do?
Researcher David yelled.
More to the point,
Dr. Carpenter said, turning and marching towards Clennon. He launched a furious punch at the assistant, knocking him to the floor.
Why did you set 914 to very fine, Clennon?
The enraged doctor shouted.
You're the one who unleashed that abomination, you maniac!
What? Clennon replied, fearfully trembling.
I didn't. I swear I didn't. It said course. I'm sure of it. You expect us to believe that was a mistake? Gentlemen, we need to focus on the situation at hand,
the security officer interjected.
Regardless of who's responsible, we need to inform the Foundation higher-ups.
There's an emergency lockdown, Russell replied. It would have triggered the moment the SCP-610 specimen got free.
You've trapped us with a monster, Clennon,
Dr. Carpenter spat. Hold on, researcher David spoke up. Wasn't it Botton's idea to use 914 in the first place? The common area fell silent as everyone turned to look at Dr. Botten. Did you plan for this, Doc? David pushed. Botten chuckled.
Need I remind you, my friends, that we all agreed to use the clockworks, did we not? All of our names are on the request, he answered. Besides, accusing me, David, that's rather rich coming from you. What's that supposed to mean? The researcher fired back.
Beckoning his finger, Botten encouraged the rest of the team to follow him across the common area to where a row of lockers stood, each door bearing one of their names. He gestured to the one labeled David.
Go on,
Botten added. Shooting him a dirty look, David barged past the disease expert and opened his locker. Not one among the group expected what would fall out. It was an old leather-bound book, symbols carved into the front cover. Instantly, thanks to the work studying SCP-610, the researchers all knew a text on sarcasm when they saw one. It had been long known that the flesh that hates was often described in texts revered by sarkic cults, who worship death, decay, and disease.
What the hell, David?
Russell exclaimed, picking up the book and examining it in disbelief.
You're a sarkist?
Carpenter asked, the fury in his voice already elevating.
No, I'm not!
Researcher David protested.
I've never seen that before. It was in your locker,
the doctor yelled.
You're one of those cannibal cultists. This was your plan.
To refine the flesh for your twisted, death-worshipping religion.
It certainly seems that way, Botan interjected. After all, researcher David did seem frustrated at our earlier results. Impatient, even.
You! David pointed at the doctor. You planted this in my locker!
You're here a sarcist, Clennon repeated in a nervous stammer.
You made me turn the dial to very fine. You made that thing appear. You made me your accomplice!
Anger tears streamed down his face. Clennon's hand reached for the security officer's gun and went to draw it, planning to shoot David on the spot. But as he went to pull the weapon from the guard's holster, it wouldn't budge. It was then that Assistant Clennon stared in horror at his hand. His fingers had fused to the guard's leg. The officer gave a twisted grin as his torso burst open, tendrils of flesh latching onto Clennon and assimilating him. Just like it had done before, the flesh creature broke down its victim's body, making it a new part of itself, a grotesque mass of limbs and bloody matter, littered with the discarded faces of those it had infected. The research team looked at it terrified, their stomachs turning, disgusted at the growing, growling abomination of bodies fused to one another.
Oh, you're beautiful,
Russell heard a voice whisper behind him. He turned to see Botan, looking at the SCP-610 creature and smiling. Researcher David was the closest, and the creature lunged at him, pulling his leg out from under him. Screaming in fear, the researcher fell onto the ground and was dragged towards the flesh. It pulled him in, his body stretching, skin tearing and bones snapping as he became part of it. A new set of limbs added to the monster. Dr. Carpenter went to try and pull him free, but it was already too late. But he stepped back, knowing that if he touched it, he would be infected too. The sound of running caught Russell's attention, and he spotted Botan making a break for it. Grabbing Dr. Carpenter by the sleeve, the researcher pulled him in the same direction, partly running away from the flesh as it assimilated David, and partly chasing the sarkic saboteur. The pair of them quickly caught up to Botan, leaning over himself and panting breathlessly.
Thank God you two made it,
he wheezed after the run.
I can't believe David could do this to unleash this nightmare upon us.
Russell thought to snap at him, to scream how dare he keep lying, but Botan's back was to him now. He'd never get a better chance. There was a cabinet on the corridor wall containing a fire axe for emergencies. As carefully and quietly as he could, Russell fished the axe out of its case whilst Botan and Carpenter were looking away.
We should get the Foundation to lift the lockdown, Botan was saying. They need to let us out and then— Oh! Oh!
He let out a blood-curdling scream mid-sentence as the axe blade wounded him. Russell pulled it back, standing over the doctor as he fell to the floor in agony.
Russell, have you lost your mind?
Carpenter exclaimed. No, Doctor. He's the cultist. I have no idea how he tricked Clennon, but that flesh creature exists because of him, the researcher answered. From the floor, unable to move thanks to his injury, Dr. Botan began to laugh.
It took me years to infiltrate the Foundation. So much time waiting to gain access to that blessed flesh, he gloated. And now you've helped me to refine it, to create its ultimate form. You want to kill me? Go ahead, Russell. My life doesn't matter. For once that creature is free, it will bring about a new age of flesh, and Grand Karcist Iron will reward me for the role I played in unleashing it.
David was right, Carpenter realized.
Botan, you planted that book on him to throw us off.
Doctor, we need to think of something, Researcher Russell interjected, axe still in hand. Nobody knows more about the flesh that hates than us. There must be a way to kill that thing. Otherwise, if it gets out of this lockdown, it could spread to everyone in the Foundation. What about fire? That's been effective against 610 infectees before, right?
Yes, but
the doctor desperately tried to think. This new being we've created, he created, Russell argued, looking at the grimacing, wounded Botan. We cannot deny the role we've all played in this, researcher, Carpenter argued. And we have no idea if it possesses the same weaknesses as the flesh before its refinement. But we have to try, sir, the researcher protested. Of course, I agree. The sickening sound of a slithering, slick mass was rapidly approaching. Still laying on the floor in pain, Dr. Botan had been dragged to the middle of a junction, with Carpenter and Russell hiding around either corner. Suddenly, Botan started hollering as the flesh came into view, practically calling it to him.
Oh, look at you! He exclaimed. You're better than I could have ever hoped for!
Looking down at him with the faces it had collected, the creature stabbed one of its disgusting appendages through Botan, drawing its body into its growing form.
I am honored to give my life so that the age of flesh may begin,
the doctor said weakly, through the pain as he was infected. From around the corner,
Carpenter had taken the Sarkic text and set its pages on fire with his cigarette lighter. Turning to the creature, he hurled the mass of burning paper at it, hoping it would be enough fire to spread to the flesh while it was assimilating Botan, who they had left there as bait. The fiery book collided with the monstrosity. As Russell peeked around the corner, he saw the flesh retreating from the flames, Botan's body now added to it. For a moment, it seemed like the creature was afraid of the fire, but slowly it drew nearer and nearer to the book. With ease, it stamped down the flames with Botan's leg, dousing the fire and suffering no damage to it at all. Gripping the axe in his hands, Russell went to charge at the creature, only to feel something push him back. Dr. Carpenter had stopped him. "Run!" he yelled. Instantly, Russell turned and raced down the corridor, the sound of fleshy tentacles whipping through the air. He dared not look back, just in case the monster was right behind him. Eventually, he reached another corner and slammed his back against it, hands shuddering as he held on to the fire axe. He had no idea what had happened to Carpenter. Maybe it got him, or perhaps he had managed to give it the slip at the last second. "Russell!" came a hushed voice from around the corner, one the researcher recognized. He turned to see Dr. Carpenter approaching him, sneaking like he was trying to avoid being heard. "I think I managed to give it the slip," the doctor whispered. For a second, Russell backed up, his hands tightening around the axe handle. This might have looked like Dr. Carpenter, but was it? "Are you really you, Doctor?" he asked. "Of course I am," Carpenter replied. "You don't think that I'm not that monstrosity?" Russell raised the axe defensively, only to notice the sadness in the doctor's face. Unable to bring himself to swing, even to find out, the researcher lowered his weapon. Carpenter looked grateful. "Come on, let's get them to lift this lockdown," he said. "I'm sure an MTF can step in and take care of our mistake." As the pair of them cautiously made their way towards one of the locked doors, Dr. Carpenter reached out a hand to place it on Russell's shoulder. We've all thought about disasters. Imagined massive floods, fires, or a meteor suddenly crashing into Earth. But what happens when the destruction comes quietly and suddenly, with the dawning of a new day? Over the next 24 hours, the world as we know it will crumble, and something strange and terrible will rise to take its place. What will that look like? Who will try to rise to the occasion and help, and who will cower in the dark? What happens to the people around the world in the first 24 hours after day breaks? Let's find out. Hour 1. It's 6 a.m. on a farm in Kansas, and the land is just beginning to wake up. The farmer and his wife and children are still sleeping, waiting for the cry of their rooster to tell them that it's time to start the day. The cows are grazing in the open field, letting out the occasional half-hearted moo, but they're still a bit too sleepy to give it their all. The pigs snort restlessly in the barn, feeling breakfast time approaching. The rooster, proud and stately, hops onto the roof of the chicken coop, surveying his domain. He tilts his head back and lets out a mighty crow. Cock-a-doodle. The sound catches in his throat as something strange begins to happen. His beak softens like wax dripping from a lit candle. It drops to the ground with a soft plop as his mighty wake-up call fades to a gurgle. There is something wrong this morning. Something truly, deeply wrong. If the rooster were capable of complex thought, he would be terrified. Instead, he is just melting, along with the hens, the cows, and the pigs, all dripping onto the grass as the faint light of morning changes them. Inside the farmhouse, the family begins to scream. Hour 2. An hour later in New York City, the city that never sleeps gets a rude awakening. No one can be sure when exactly the chaos broke out, but all of a sudden, people in their little apartments wake up to the sound of masses of other people calling out for help, of the thunderous footsteps of crowds tearing through the streets, and then of a strange gurgling sound that replaces the bedlam. A young woman throws open her blackout curtains to get a better look and finds herself melting along with them. Across town, a landlord knocks on his tenant's door, demanding some overdue rent, but there is no answer, only the slop of something oozing across the floor inside. Security footage of Times Square catches an eerie sight, masses of molten flesh spreading across the streets. The masses of tourists that were gathered there only hours before melted together into something else, bathed in the neon glow of the billboards and lights of the city. Hour 3. On the other side of the world, in Canberra, Australia, a group of college students is camping in the wilderness. While the United States is waking up to a horror show, they are sleeping soundly in their tents beneath the light of the moon. Well, except for one of them, who had decided to take his sleeping bag outside and sleep under the stars. That would have been a lovely idea, except for the fact that all sunlight, including that which reflected off the moon, has become quite destructive to the human body. To all living things, in fact. His melted form sloshes around inside the sleeping bag, trying to regain some semblance of its original shape. Inside their tent, his friends are still themselves, shielded remarkably well from the light by the thick canvas. That is, until one of them gets up to go to the bathroom and unzips the front of the tent. His mouth is already useless by the time he thinks to scream, and the moonlight floods inside and covers the group in a silvery glow. It doesn't take long for them to meet the same fate as their friend outside, melting together into one massive entity. They had hoped this camping trip would bring them closer together, and, well, it did. Hour 4. Meanwhile, a speleologist is deep in the bowels of a cave in Tianshang that she has been studying, completely unaware of the terrors of the surface. She's taking samples, dictating notes to her research assistant, and keeping an eye out for bats, when suddenly, she receives a communication from one of the members of her research team up above. The technology they use only allows for short text messages that can be transmitted through the layers of soil and rock all around, but this warning needs only a few words. Don't come up. Not safe. The words send a chill up her spine. What could possibly be happening that's more dangerous than being down here? She writes back, asking for clarification, but receives none. Through the dark tunnels illuminated only by a few headlamps, she thinks she can hear the echo of a scream. Hour 5. Those that are still safe and have managed to hold on to their identities and forms have noticed yet another threat in addition to whatever the light is doing. All around the world, planes are dropping from the sky, their pilots and crews transformed into something incapable of flying an aircraft. Airplanes that were en route to their various destinations, thousands of them going in every direction imaginable, are now plummeting towards the ground, crashing into the ocean, or in some especially unlucky cases, landing on buildings that still have survivors inside. It's a truly brutal bit of irony to escape the sun's terrible rays and find some small sanctuary, only to have an airplane fall out of the sky and destroy it all. Hour 6. Over at the SCP Foundation, everyone is on high alert, trying to categorize what is happening and find a way to stop it. But how do you contain an anomaly when that anomaly is the sun itself? In the meantime, the O5 Council retreats to a specialized underground bunker constructed especially for this kind of dire scenario, outfitted with beds, reading materials, and enough supplies to keep them alive for several years, as long as no one hogs the snacks. As the rest of the Foundation staff scramble to find a solution before the rest of the Earth's population is reduced to goo, the anomalies contained throughout the various sites begin to take notice. SCP-099 oozes frantically around its site, hugging and nuzzling anyone it can get close to. It doesn't fully understand what is going on, but it can tell that everyone is quite upset and frightened by something, and it wants to help them feel better. Other anomalies have a less charitable approach. SCP-173 takes advantage of the chaos to escape containment, snapping a few necks on its way out just for fun. After all, everyone's eyes are otherwise occupied. Because it is not made from any organic material, it is immune to the effects of the sun and makes its way outside to explore the pandemonium. Research staff pass by SCP-682's containment chamber can hear the giant beast chuckling to itself, a sickening, choking sound as it laughs at the fall of humanity. Finally, it sighs. One scientist peeking through the observation window swears that the hard-to-destroy reptile is smiling before one of his colleagues ushers him down the hall, away from the monster's celebration. SCP-507 appears in the hall with a pop, back from another one of his involuntary interdimensional voyages.
Whoa, where's the fire?
He asks, taking in the hysteria around him.
Did something get out?
A bit of unease creeps into his voice.
No!
Shouts a passing guard. It's what's trying to get in!
God, I have the worst timing.
507 groans. Hour 7. Back in the realm of civilians, newscasters hop on to broadcast from studios devoid of natural light, unsure if there are any survivors left to hear their messages.
one television personality forces his usual bright smile, staring down the barrel of the camera with barely concealed tears in his eyes. He can't let his smile crack, can't let himself break down. If he lets himself cry, really cry, he's scared he won't be able to stop. "Please, remain calm," he reads off the teleprompter as a production assistant sobs into the shoulder of the camera operator. "Experts are working to determine what is going on. In the meantime, please follow these instructions to ensure your safety and that of your loved ones. Do not go outside unless you are covered in proper equipment to shield yourself from the sun or moon. Block all sources of natural light in your residence. Do not attempt to interact with those who have been affected by this disaster. Do not touch them. Do not let them into your home. Do not speak to them. Again, please remain calm. Help is on the way." He doesn't know if the words are true. He only knows that it's his responsibility to give the people hope, something familiar they can turn to when nothing makes sense. The camera switches off. He covers his face and lets the tears loose. Hour 8. In spite of the pleas from newscasters, people are very much panicking. How could they not? Everything's descended into absolute mayhem, and it's only been 8 hours since it all began. Unfortunately, where there is panic, there's someone trying to make a quick buck off of their fellow man. Even more unfortunately, the internet is still up and running so far, and with survivors taking to social media to live tweet their experiences and post as much as they can on Instagram, Facebook, and anywhere else they can reach out for help, it is the perfect environment for scammers. A Twitter thread goes viral claiming that wrapping oneself in aluminum foil will protect against the effects of the light. Facebook posts circulate, hawking all sorts of natural remedies and super sunscreens from essential oil blends to bacon grease. A fraudulent GoFundMe page pops up, claiming to belong to a climate scientist raising money for a ray gun that will reverse the damage done to the Earth's atmosphere, which he cites as the cause of the destruction. Hour 9. Not all the information circulating online is false, however. A video is posted on TikTok with the caption, "These mofos can talk," featuring video of a teenage boy cowering in a dark room as one of the formerly human flesh creatures moves around outside the door. After a moment or two of silence, a garbled voice calls out to him, "Brian, come outside. Please come out into the sun. I miss you." The video's comments are filled with other users sharing similar experiences, saying, "It talked just like my boyfriend. It barked like a dog," or even, "It was singing my favorite Ariana Grande song." Similar videos pop up in the wake of this first recording, urging survivors to ignore the voices, no matter who they seem like they belong to. Hour 10. While some people are using the internet to spread helpful information on the nature of the events outside, others have ruled out rational explanations entirely, claiming that this is divine punishment for the sins of mankind, or the Matrix finally collapsing in on itself. Others deny that the horrible events are even happening at all. An infamously contrarian livestream personality logs on from his insulated basement, crowing to his viewers that
None of this is actually happening. It's all a ploy to keep us complacent and under government control. Ask yourself, why don't they want us going outside? So we don't see what they're really up to.
As commenters try desperately to change his mind, he doubles down.
You're all just a bunch of sheeple, bah.
He laughs.
Look, I'll show you there's nothing to worry about.
He carries his laptop upstairs with him and steps outside onto the sidewalk. In his computer screen, he can see the video feed of his own face beginning to droop and liquefy before he can even feel it. He tries to run back inside, away from the light, but it's too late. His legs are already giving out. The viewers can only watch as their favorite streamer dissolves in real time, until his now useless hands drop the laptop to the ground, where it breaks into pieces, and the stream goes dark. Hour 12. For those who have survived this long, at the 12-hour mark, things are beginning to get tense. Actually, that would be an understatement. Tensions have been bubbling steadily for the past 12 hours, as people have melted into unrecognizable waxy monsters, exploded in plane crashes, and been traumatized to within an inch of their lives. Now those tensions are boiling over. Human beings in a crisis can be a bit like crabs in a bucket, vicious and ready to tear each other to pieces if they perceive that they might be left behind.
When there is a shortage of resources, this selfish fear and anger only gets worse. Hour 13. There might not be a lack of food or fresh water yet, but there is another resource that seems worth destroying each other for: darkness. In a world where light means death, the only safe place is in the dark. But there are a limited number of places that people can go. In rural areas, families retreat to storm cellars or the insides of empty grain silos. In cities, underground parking garages become hiding places, and there just isn't enough space there to go around. People erupt into physical fights in these parking complexes, punching and shoving each other, even attacking with broken bottles and other improvised weapons, all to stake their claim over this newfound territory. Even more contentious are warehouses, insulated hiding places filled with all the supplies that will soon start to dwindle: toilet paper, canned goods, soap, and bottled water. These things just might be worth killing for, and many are already prepared to do so. Hour 14. While the SCP Foundation is busy trying to maintain order and find a way to end this catastrophic event, other groups dedicated to the anomalous are equally busy. The Chaos Insurgency attempt to launch a sneak attack on Site-19 while its occupants are distracted. However, their defenses against the sun prove ineffective, and they are melted before they can so much as reach the site's entrance. Inside, the Foundation staff never even notice. They have far too much on their hands already. Other groups take a less offensive approach, prioritizing safety. Members of the Serpent's Hand escape to the Interdimensional Wanderer's Library along with their families, settling in for the long haul and preparing to make it their permanent home as the Earth burns. They didn't want it to end this way, but they are not going to stick around to be a part of it all. Hour 18. Not all people are turning on each other, even as things appear dire. The best thing anyone can do in a horrible situation is to look for those willing to extend a helping hand. There will always be people trying to look out for others, to put out the fires, and airlift people out of the floodwaters. Though this disaster seems anything but natural, the instinct to help is still there for many. Doctors and nurses hole up in hospitals, blocking out the windows with spare pairs of scrubs and whatever else they can find to light-proof the building. There they treat the wounded that make it inside, wrapping broken bones and stitching up wounds as best they can. A few well-intentioned souls even attempt to treat those changed by the sun, those things that barely look human anymore, no matter how hard they try to arrange their soft bodies back into their former shape. It is too late for them though. There's nothing to be done, and no medical school in the world could have prepared a doctor to heal this hurt. But what about the people who aren't all the way gone? The ones who started to change but got inside in time to slow or even stop the process. Hospital staff treat the melting like an infection, amputating molten limbs or attempting to clean and bandage them, unsure of what to do with a piece of human body that no longer behaves like flesh and bone. They're able to save a few people, but far more are already doomed by the time they make it inside. They disintegrate slowly but steadily, fading away on the operating table until their warbling voices are urging the doctors to follow them outside.
It doesn't hurt,
they promise, reaching out with fleshy tentacles that were once hands. It's hard to remember the Hippocratic Oath when a monster is trying to pull you into its grasp. Hour 20. While some are trying to help the creatures created by the sun's wrath, others have been waiting for this moment since they saw their very first zombie movie. To them, this is an outbreak, plain and simple, and it's the perfect chance to suit up and play soldier. They cloak themselves in body armor and helmets with dark-tinted visors, and grab whatever weapons they can find. Grenades, firearms, flamethrowers, anything is fair game at the end of the world. A former police officer and massive fan of zombie-themed first-person shooters takes to the streets, staring down an enormous mound of flesh made from dozens of people melding together, ropey tentacles flailing and grasping for more bodies to add to its mass. He fires an array of bullets into the thing, but they are absorbed into its surface, swallowed up inside. He searches for weak points, for eyes, a heart, anything he can target, but he can't spot anything vulnerable. But he's not deterred. He'll try fire next. He lights a homemade Molotov cocktail and hurls it at the beast, waiting for it to ignite and listening for the sound of its painful cries. But nothing comes. The cocktail explodes and nearby debris catches on fire, but the ball of flesh doesn't react. It just continues to advance towards him, making its way down the street as if it has all the time in the world. There's only one option left, and it's the riskiest one of all. He pulls out a grenade and pulls the pin. Throwing it won't do. He needs to run up and thrust the grenade into the body of the monster to blow it up from the inside. He's going to have to be quick. He summons all the stamina from his high school track and field days and makes a mad sprint for the creature, holding the grenade out in front of him. Eyes on the prize, there is nothing but the mission now, the chance to be a hero. He is so singularly focused on his task that he doesn't notice a tentacle snaking along the ground toward him until it loops around his feet, flipping him over until he's upside down. The force of the movement knocks his helmet loose, and it falls to the ground. He moves to shield his face with his hands, but it's useless. The sunlight has already found him. He is already changing, becoming one with the very thing he promised to destroy. He stares up at the mass with reverence, just before his eyes drop out of his head, and reaches his arms out to welcome the embrace. By the time the grenade detonates, he can't bring himself to care about it. He can't care about anything except being part of the flesh. Hour 22. If individuals have a tendency to blame each other in times of strife, then governments are even worse. Surviving leaders of various countries, shivering in their bunkers and tearing out their hair with stress, begin to convince themselves that this must be some kind of act of biological warfare gone wrong. Nuclear testing, some kind of deadly gas, something. Surely ruination on this grand of a scale must be man-made. With no other recourse, they begin declaring war on each other. Everyone pointing a finger at someone else as no one is able to take responsibility. The threats, the denials, and the rage escalate until finally, the North Korean government makes a decision that would seem completely insane under any other circumstances. They attempt to nuke the sun. It's irrational and it's ineffective, of course, but it's the last gasp of a species hurtling towards extinction. One final attempt to bring it all to an end before it's all truly over. Hour 24. And as the dust clears, it becomes completely apparent the old world is dead, and a new world, for better or for much, much worse, is born. Nothing will ever be the same again.
Sirens blared, and the loud ringing of the emergency alarm system gave everyone a scare, like something had jumped out at them unexpectedly. With that fright came a sharp jolt of adrenaline. Something wasn't right, and their options were either to await instructions or try and flee with their lives. Most took the latter, dropping their shovels and various mining tools so they could turn heel and bolt to the nearest opening. Outside. If they could just get outside, above ground where the air was a little clearer, then they could avoid whatever it was that was happening. But for Yuri, escape wasn't an option. He had to do something. It had been a standard operation. Everything had been run by the books and was going all the smoother for it. But that noble approach hadn't stopped the drill from breaching into a cavern, carving through stone into a previously undiscovered area. That, on its own, wasn't enough to cause concern. It was the sudden cave-in that had triggered the alarms and led to the ensuing panic. At the controls of the gigantic excavation machine, Yuri helplessly pulled at levers and pressed buttons, desperately trying to undo the rapidly worsening damage. But it was too late. Rocks and debris were showering from above, like the earth itself was retaliating against the mining workers. It was as if they shouldn't have drilled that deep. The cave-in almost like they had awakened something. Unfortunately for Yuri, a falling slab of stone made sure he wouldn't get to see exactly what. The dust settled shortly after, but only one recorded casualty, along with multiple injured mine workers, wasn't enough to deter them from exploring what they had accidentally stumbled upon. Venturing into the cavern system pierced by the drill, those who first dared to set foot down there were greeted by the sight of strange, crudely built stone structures. Someone had been here before, but how? Nothing could survive this far below ground. Nothing living, nothing human at least. And that was true, given that the workers also came across something else in their initial exploration: human remains.
Of course, this raised quite a concern, prompting the workers to try and contact their superiors. Uncovering bodies wasn't exactly uncommon for anyone whose job it was to dig into the ground, so they at least had a protocol in place for this kind of situation. What none of them were prepared for, however, was the fiery abomination that suddenly emerged as they were trying to call for help. The creature was a nightmarish blend of a humanoid shape, with the head of a dog and giant wings much like a bat's. Covered in rough fur, its body was exuding an oily, flammable substance, which it used to incinerate the surviving mine workers in an instant. By the time that operatives of the SCP Foundation arrived on scene in the town of Mirny within the Sakha Republic, the creature was on a rampage. Buildings were collapsing as the winged beast set the nearby area ablaze. Troops on the ground, even once they were able to get the monster in range, found that their conventional weapons were useless. It cost the lives of 17 Mobile Task Force operatives, all immolated down to a cinder, before a chopper was able to neutralize the creature. With the threat destroyed and the town administered with amnestics and fed a convincing cover story, you'd think that was case closed on a job well done. But the Foundation discovered within the nearby Mirny mine something that would completely change everything they thought they knew. Deep underground was a sinkhole leading to a spatial anomaly below, consisting of the system of caverns that the mine workers had inadvertently stumbled upon. That wasn't all that the Foundation was about to discover down there, and what they came across would soon become one of their darkest secrets, SCP-3667. It wasn't long before the Foundation began encountering other unusual creatures that seemingly appeared in the vicinity of SCP-3667. However, not all of them matched the description of the original bat-winged, dog-headed, pyromaniacal visitor. Officially dubbed as instances of SCP-3667-1, these creatures range from the aforementioned monstrosity to a whole host of other strange descriptions. One was an abnormally thin humanoid creature with reddish-brown skin and a head that was too big for its wiry body. It possessed an ordinary human level of intelligence and even spoke modern Russian, matching the common local dialect. In conversation, this being tried to offer wealth or power in exchange for a person's most valued possessions. However, it seemed to possess no anomalous abilities and would attempt to renegotiate a new offer immediately after a bargain was made. Then there were the Magistrates, a group of 48 humanoids with kyphotic curved spines. All of them wore furs and a variety of skulls from animals such as elks, deer, and moose. The Foundation were still none the wiser as to the true origin of all these different subspecies of creatures. They were obviously emanating from the sinkhole, and the Foundation had been making use of MTF Chi-5, codenamed Solomon Seals, to eliminate instances of SCP-3667-1 that appeared from below. Surface-to-air missile systems were even installed nearby, should any more flying creatures appear. But further exploration into the sinkhole and the caverns below would only yield further questions and even more strange entities. The 4-person unit MTF Chi-5 Team 1 was sent in to conduct preliminary exploration into SCP-3667 to try and assess more accurately the threat level posed by the sinkhole and its bizarre residents. Finding themselves in a large cave, the team followed the sounds of running water to a wide stream, the water a yellowish-gray in coloration. They also detected the sound of numerous voices, all whispering in Russian, but found it too difficult to distinguish what they were saying. There were remains, too, of some kind of structure that seemed to indicate the existence of sentient life within SCP-3667. There was a portion of a wall, even a hallway, that led into a large windowless circular room. The floor of this chamber featured an elaborate mosaic that seemed to have sustained some damage, but strangely, it depicted anomalous creatures, including some that looked like the first winged monster that had appeared. After splitting up down various corridors, 2 members of Team 1 encountered a new entity from within SCP-3667. This creature resembled a large feline but had no eyes and was about 10 meters in height. It referred to the MTF operatives as sinners and foolish mortals who should have stayed in their cages. Despite being eyeless, the creature observed that the team did not possess what it called the Mark of Ogniena and remarked that they should not have been there. Feeling threatened by the creature, MTF Chi-5 Team 1 was able to blow it up with a grenade before being safely retrieved by their fellow Foundation personnel. Exploration into SCP-3667 was then resumed by MTF Chi-5 Teams 2 and 3, who were alarmed to hear what sounded like a human scream coming from somewhere within the caves. While they first assumed it was another 3667-1 creature, someone suggested the possibility that a civilian could have stumbled onto the site of the Mirny mine before the Foundation had arrived and established a secure perimeter around the sinkhole. Hearing the scream a second time, this time further away, the MTF agents decided to investigate, just in case an innocent person had been dragged underground by one of the creatures. Passing through a basin of the same strange fluid that Team 1 had discovered, the MTF teams could hear more unsettling sounds coming from deep within the caverns. In particular, a repetitive scratching noise. Next, they discovered a large, intricate wooden structure, a circle with one side that appeared to be winched open. Inside, they could see rows of wooden spikes, covered in a dark liquid that everyone assumed was blood. Hearing whimpers from their supposed missing civilian, the team's commander decided to call a retreat. It was then that the MTF realized there were over 20 more wooden structures nearby. Each was of a different shape and size, but all of them were covered in rats that were staring at the Foundation operatives. These various pieces of wooden apparatuses seemed to resemble torture devices, and some of them had bodies inside. The MTF agents thought they had discovered the grisly fate of their missing civilian. Little did they know that things were far worse than they first seemed. The bodies and the torture devices were still alive. The Foundation soon realized there were upwards of 12,000 people within SCP-3667 and immediately began efforts to rescue as many as they could. Luckily, they had established a field base on site in the mine, close enough to the sinkhole that led into SCP-3667. However, the unfortunate reality was that saving all these trapped human beings was no small undertaking, and space at their nearby base, Site-574, was limited. Only 150 of the people were able to be recovered and were transported to Site-574. Those that were having been found trying to escape from SCP-3667 or being eaten by the various nightmarish creatures below. But what quickly became apparent was that these people, those safely recovered from SCP-3667, and those still trapped within, weren't exactly ordinary. When Team 1 had discovered the strange yellow-gray stream in SCP-3667, they had collected a sample of the fluid for analysis. Examining this sample revealed an anomalous molecular structure that would actively bond with organic matter, and this same unidentified molecule was present in the bloodstream of the human beings found beneath the sinkhole. It seemed to have bestowed each one of them with an anomalous ability for a limited form of regeneration. Their bodies could withstand far more damage than an average non-anomalous human. The Foundation even experimented with introducing the anomalous molecule into the blood of other test subjects, but it didn't have the same regenerative effect. It was assumed that the regeneration was linked directly to some other factor, and the molecule from the fluid only acted as a catalyst. As such, every person recovered from the caverns was given the collective designation of SCP-3667-2. Now, various subspecies of strange creatures and a group of people whose bodies could regenerate, both living in a system of caverns beneath Mirny Sakha Republic. Not to mention all the wooden torture devices that were being used on the SCP-3667-2s. Just what the hell was going on here? And what was it that made this discovery one of the Foundation's darkest secrets? Well, the answers to that could be discovered in what they learned next about the anomalous people they'd recovered from the sinkhole. As the Foundation continued its examination, their researchers at Site-574 happened upon a starting realization. The SCP-3667-2 people were perfect physical and genetic matches to former residents of the nearby town of Mirny. In fact, of the over 12,000 total, only 1,328 didn't appear to correspond to any known person from the area. But then, thousands of others all had proof of their existence that the Foundation was able to recover from the town's public records. Dates of birth, names, former places of residence, family, and next of kin, along with dates of death. The SCP-3667-2 instances all claim to have spent their entire lives underground, beneath the sinkhole where they were tortured endlessly by nightmarish creatures. Their bodies could regenerate the external damage they received, meaning the torture would go on for days, months, or even years at a time. When sampling bodies buried in local cemeteries, the Foundation discovered that these were in fact copies of deceased residents. But not everyone who had lived and died in Mirny. Only those whose families had lived there for at least 2 generations, and who, while they were alive, were suspected of committing a crime but never convicted. There was one other unifying factor too. During their lives, these residents all had some affiliation with a particular religious group known as the Light of Five Heavens Russian Orthodox Church. To put it simply, SCP-3667 was hell. Following a number of other incursions involving SCP-3667-1 creatures, the Foundation was eventually able to open negotiations with the entities in order to ensure the continued stability of SCP-3667. The former director of Site-574, Midai Bokome, was appointed as the Director of Hell and placed in charge of overseeing the anomaly. Under her watch, the Foundation would supposedly be relocating the displaced SCP-3667-2s to safe, classified locations where they could be reintegrated into society. However, in an email from the Director of Hell, she proposed a solution to the Foundation's dwindling number of D-Class personnel. I am happy to announce that something has come up that changes that. I'll be sending each of you a shipment of new D-Class come next week. It isn't as many as you had hoped for, but rest assured, these ones will withstand most anything you throw at them. We've covered a lot here on this channel, and what you might have noticed about the nature of our discoveries is that knowledge is best broken down before digested. Which is to say, if you are to learn how to assemble a computer, it may benefit you also to see one taken apart. When you do so, you'll notice in front of you not a computer at all, but a collection of individual parts. It's in understanding these distinctive parts in isolation that helps us shape our awareness of their marriage and how they cooperate with one another to become their collective self. Sure, this may be good in practice, but then tell me, how do we comprehend a whole that is composed of parts unwilling to isolate themselves from the rest? Because, let's face it, not all things, let alone SCPs, can be torn apart for the convenience of our study. No matter the subject we seek to understand, it may choose to resist our deconstruction by one way or another. Landmarks like the Temples of Malta and the Pyramid of Djoser are held together by our respect. Monuments like the Statue of Liberty are held together by copper. The family was held together by Charles Manson. But it's not always the preservation of history or elements of the periodic table or psychopaths that reject humans' wishes to disassemble. Far stronger than forces of nuts and bolts are that of character and loyalty, and SCP-2085 is welded together by exactly that. SCP-2085 is a militant anarchist organization consisting of 6 cybernetically enhanced individuals, A1 through A5 and B, operating under the name Kuroi Usagi Shiden, or more commonly known as the Black Rabbit Company. SCP-2085-A subjects are 5 adult female augmented humans, designated SCP-2085-A-1 through SCP-2085-A-5. Subjects are genetic chimeras, each with an estimated 6 to 10 different gene donors. They are fluent in Japanese, Mandarin, Chinese, Cantonese, Korean, Russian, and English, with additional languages varying by individual. Subjects display an array of genetic and cybernetic enhancements, including genetic splices of Felis catus physiology, that is, having cat-like ears, tails, and hair. These tails are prehensile and capable of holding small objects, so if you're accusing one of them of stealing your pen, don't just go searching their pockets. They also have grip pads on hands and feet, in case they ever did decide to retire from anarchy and take up surfing. Their impressive features don't stop there. If they haven't already put James Bond's gadgets to shame yet, just wait. Daniel Craig is about to look like Dora the Explorer. SCP-2085-A-1 through A-5 all have ocular implants with thermal vision, heads-up display, and recording functionality. Also noted are carbon nanoweave muscle fiber augmentation, reinforced endoskeleton, and brain-computer interface with internal hard drive. The list goes on, each etc. more elaborate than the next. Yet what stands out most about them is not a weapon, but an attitude. These 6 members, although now held in isolation from one another, do not show any signs of splitting up, not even when under the heavy pressure of the Foundation's interrogation. Agents spend their hours looking for cracks to dig their fingers into, trying to get one to betray the other and reveal sensitive information. But when asked to spill the beans, SCP-2085 screws the lid on tighter. They remain, as a whole, resistant to our deconstruction. The agents get nowhere with their investigation, and with each minute wasted, it's another victory for SCP-2085. The hours go on and they keep stacking up W's, building momentum day after day, growing stronger and stronger as a unit. As the Foundation tries to tear the group apart, they respond with even greater resistance. And this style of resistance is unique to each member. Imagine you are confronting SCP-2085-A-2. She is talkative, and so you think you might get somewhere. You are all ears. But what SCP-2085-A-2 sees isn't ears, but troughs, and she is happy to feed you her slop. She talks, and you listen closer and closer, but all you are getting is misinformation, false names, inaccurate stories, dates that don't add up. You focus and follow along, only to find yourself having run a marathon all the way to a dead end. Now you are faced with SCP-2085-A-5, who takes a different, more nonsensical approach. You are happy to no longer have to sit through inaccuracies to decipher truths, but now there are no truths at all. All that you are given are absurdities. She speaks in a way that makes you scratch your head, once saying for no apparent reason, "I take a hammer and I break my legs. I break 'em for the better." After so many scratches, you swear you've dug an inch into your skin. And so you move on to SCP-2085-A-4, hoping for better luck. She is straightforward with you, that much you like, but she's hostile and doesn't cooperate. When you ask her name, she raises her middle finger. She tucks it back in to create a fist, and then that fist punches the divider between you. No amount of reinforced glass could make you feel safe at that moment. Cracks spread. It looks like a web spun by a spider, and you feel as small as one. Thankfully, a protective shutter is lowered. Aerosol sedatives are pumped into the containment unit. She continues to try to escape, yelling profanities even harsh for someone locked behind bars. Your ears have taken a beating from curse words, nonsensical rambles, and heaps of misinformation. You want to lower your head into a toilet bowl and hear nothing but water. Yes, that is where these women have driven you. Your head to the bottom of a toilet bowl. You have put in so many hours, and yet you have learned nothing new. And if you can't learn anything new, you might have to rely more on what you already know. But what do you know? Well, you know this. Their track record is quite impressive. Verified operations include smuggling, theft, assault, vandalism, kidnapping, extortion, property damage, possession of fissile materials, corporate sabotage, embezzlement, identity theft, fraud, copyright infringement, piracy, possession, transport, and sale of anomalous items, and, of course, tax evasion. Yet, when grilled under the heat of investigation, they do not reveal any details about the nature of these operations. You just know that they happened. All that is told is that SCP-2085 navigates in such a way as to minimize the chance of civilian casualties and maximize material and morale damage to their target. They are proud of this. It seems as if SCP-2085 perceives themselves on the side of good. While their list of operations on paper look like crimes, they stand proudly behind them, pleading guilty with a grin. But behind every smile is more teeth. Teeth that go beyond saying cheese. Teeth hiding in the dark caves of a sealed mouth. And you are determined to play dentist and find your way in. But SCP-2085 doesn't say, "ah," for just anyone. So how are you to understand a group that resists our preferred methods of learning? How are you to properly assess the pieces of a puzzle when the puzzle is glued tightly together? It starts at the top. Before you can decipher the motives of a nation, you'd be smart to study their leader. And if you want to extrapolate the schemes of a football team, you'd interview the coach. And to truly know the moral of a television show, you'd be better off asking the creator than the actors. All of this is just to say, If you are to ever understand the complexities of SCP-2085, it is necessary you begin with SCP-2085-B, the person pulling the string of the entire operation for all of these years. Now you might be imagining a man of many muscles, someone able to fight a bear with an arm tied behind his back, someone who kicks through saloon doors, tilts back his liquor, and walks out with a woman in each arm, or a catgirl. But you'd be dead wrong. SCP-2085-B, also known as Wizard, does not look like an imposing lead at first glance, or even at the 100th glance. He is generally in very poor health, and his face shows it. He suffers from a variety of illnesses, most notably a vitamin D deficiency, acute radiation syndrome, and has unmanageable scarring from severe and repeated skin ulceration. He doesn't wear a cape and glamorous spandex often found hanging in superheroes' closets, but instead he wears an advanced crew escape suit, accompanied by a cheap bathrobe and flimsy red felt wizard's hat. He looks, with no elegant way of putting it, like a dork, a goofball, a doofus. You get the point. Furthermore, he is an adult male human with certain cybernetic and genetic enhancements. He has an adaptation of the gastrointestinal tract to allow for an all-liquid diet. Within his suit, an esophageal input port and waste output port are integrated. It is equipped with modifications to regulate sweat, reduce abrasion damage from extended usage, and aid in skin regeneration. His genetic enhancements include the replacement of 11 previously missing digits on hands and feet, and also has an internal drug pump, typically used for painkillers, because, as we are about to learn, SCP-2085-B is most often on the wrong end of pain. Notice these modifications are not those you would find in a science fiction novel, but more likely behind the trench coat of a suspicious man in a dark alley. And we all know nothing good is ever concealed behind a trench coat. But have you ever wondered if that truth also extends to robes? Because when we pull open SCP-2085's, what we find is truly terrifying. SCP-2085-1. SCP-2085-1 is a fibrous mass of self-replicating carbon nanomaterials within SCP-2085-B's chest cavity, with growths protruding into the liver, pancreas, gallbladder, spinal cord, and left lung. The growth of the SCP-2085-1 and its consumption of SCP-2085-B's body tissues has been impeded through the addition of various containment implants used to sever communication between growth sections and control nodes, and counter the replication process. SCP-2085-1's rate of replication without the influence of these containment implants is unknown. SCP-2085-1's periods of activity occur on average once every 3 months. The process lasts for up to 15 minutes and causes SCP-2085-B intense pain. Imagine a heart attack. Imagine Mike Tyson using your sternum like a punching bag. Imagine a cactus strapped to your front. This is the pain and torture SCP-2085 wears daily. There is no S logo printed on his chest like Superman. No symmetrically slick symbol like Batman. Instead, just cancerous growth. Kryptonite worn like a tie. The knot never to be loosened. But to SCP-2085-B, this anomaly is not just a number to be studied, but more so a being to be understood. It is more personal than a medical condition. It is something that he wakes up with each and every day. He calls it Red. At first, the Foundation saw SCP-2085's close connection with Red to be childish and silly, as if a small boy who names his freckles out of boredom and loneliness. But as you are about to see, how they met was more memorable than first finding a freckle in the mirror. A meteor struck down, and SCP-2085-B was the only person at the scene. Red was inside. As Wizard approached the meteor, Red leapt onto him and buried a home into his chest cavity. Far from a freckle on the skin, Red is a cancer. It grows and grows, leaching to what it can. It can't be removed with surgery. It can't be covered by a band-aid. It has no empathy or mercy. It leeches on and eats away at its host. But it's more than pain that it causes. Falling off a swing set and bursting open your leg hurts, sure, but at least both you and your injury are on the same team. Cuts try to heal. When left alone, injuries make effort to find homeostasis, but Red is a different breed. It hates us in a way that injuries are incapable of doing. It has a deep disdain for humanity. It tears Wizard down, reveling in his degradation. Its sole purpose is to eat him whole. Wizard can only take this personally, as he doesn't just feel the universally understood sensation of pain, but also the unique passion of its purpose. SCP-2085-B's adventures with Red seem to be where our story begins, and what ultimately keeps it moving. In fact, it was while SCP-2085-B was running around trying to fix his chest with implants when he eventually met who we refer to as SCP-2085-A-1 through A-5. He was at the clinic to get some new parts, and when he was going through the installation process, there was an explosion. One of the 5 girls barged out of a building, guns blazing. He started running alongside them with his chest half open. The woman embraced him immediately and reciprocated. Knowing nothing of the situation, he instinctively knew to take their side. There were bullets coming from both directions, but he intuitively understood which side was good and which side was bad. A distinction SCP-2085 believes the world needs help clarifying. But it is hard to see a reason for a war when our eyes are focused on the casualties. Beliefs are less clear when tucked behind bullets. The sounds of gunfire muffle their message. Morality, while a complex subject, SCP-2085 believes is simplified by the masses. Events are deemed good or bad based on the term used for them in a court of law. When we see the words smuggling, theft, assault, vandalism, corporate sabotage, embezzlement, identity theft, fraud, copyright infringement, piracy, and, of course, tax evasion, it is our impulse to label those as morally bad. But SCP-2085 desperately wants you to look beyond the language. They want the words to dissipate off the paper, letter by letter, until all you have is a blank page. Now look at the pencil and the hand that holds it. Watch how it moves. That is what matters. Whether it draws weapons or mermaids is irrelevant. Both can be used for good. Both can be used for evil. Intent is everything. And SCP-2085 intends on making the world a better place. Or so they like to claim. But maybe there is more to it. After SCP-2085-B and the 5 women escaped the gunfire, they went on to steal a boat and hightail it out of Japan. They spent their nights out there on the ocean, stargazing and stuffing themselves with instant ramen and cheap beer. And surprisingly, between all the crazy adventures SCP-2085-B had been on, this is what Wizard spoke about most: the time spent on the boat out at sea. For the first time in ages, he was finally somewhere where he was happy. It was this moment that actually meant the most to him. It wasn't the children they apparently saved from imperialism. It wasn't the wealth they apparently redistributed to the poor. It wasn't any good deed at all. It was the selfish, almost shallow sensation of being happy on a boat. This singular moment meant so much to SCP-2085-B. He reflected on it as if it were a wedding day or a memorable vacation, which makes you wonder. SCP-2085 has been investigated and interrogated, and all that they preach is that they are doing the world a favor with their antics. Their tales are captivating, sure, but is it actually storytelling, or is it just virtue signaling? There is an emotional depth to SCP-2085 unique to any other militant anarchist group. While they are genetically designed to most efficiently complete missions, they are not all robots fixed on the high of task completion. Each and every one of them wants more. They want a group. They want a group not just to have the numbers to overthrow a government, but to have the numbers to fill a room, or boat, with companionship. When they refuse to cooperate with you and leak information about their operation, maybe what you are witnessing isn't the strength of their loyalty, but also the weakness of their codependence. And so you decide this is the new angle you're going to take with your interrogation. You enter the room with a new focus. You feel like an earthquake, eager to make cracks in their core. You isolate SCP-2085-A-4. You are met expectantly with hostility. You fight back with psychology. You cross your legs and put on your glasses as if to say, let's talk about that anger. Where does it stem from? She strengthens her emotional guard, but you keep prying. You say that it sounds like she is lonely. You say it sounds like her loyalty doesn't come from good character, but rather insecurity and self-doubt. You ask her if completing missions with her crew was actually a way to improve the world, or was it just an elaborate way to build a close friend group bound together by common goals? Did new missions sprout from necessity, or were they fabricated by fears of being alone with nothing to do? Were end-of-operation high-fives to celebrate good overcoming evil, or were they just excuses to feel the touch of another human, skin to skin? You stop there and let silence do the rest. SCP-2085-A-4 sits with her thoughts. She is ready to break. And finally, she does. She says she's willing to provide video logs of the group's former operations. She's ready to cooperate. She's ready to abandon loyalty to groupthink and focus instead on self-improvement. In exchange, she kindly asks that she be reciprocated and that the sanction placed on her be lifted. You come to an agreement, and with that, you feel like your work is done. But is it? You're feeling cocky and accomplished. You forward the video logs to an isolated network for D-Class personnel to review, and you sit back and enjoy a celebratory drink. You have infiltrated and broken the mind of a genetically modified radical designed for anarchy. You give yourself a pat on the back, and you're feeling so great that the pat might even turn into a massage. But before you can indulge in that deep tissue level of self-admiration, the phone rings. Can it be a call from the president telling you that you're the greatest investigator of all time? Can it be that they need you to pose in front of a world-renowned artist so they can erect a statue of you in the center of town square? But the panic on the other side of the phone halts your daydream. Your stomach drops, as if a sudden plummet from a perfectly vertical roller coaster. You have fallen into a trap. The video log at the center of your negotiation was not all it was promised to be. The file, titled backup.avi, consisted of a 2-hour-long video of a feces-filled toilet, presumably recorded from SCP-2085-A's point of view, accompanied by an audio loop of the folk song Koro Beniki, as performed by the Red Army Choir. Its absurdity feels like an art project, like a short film you are assigned to watch in a community college class. But instead of putting you to sleep, it does a whole lot more. The contained audiovisual cognitohazard induced anaphylaxis and exudative diarrhea in the observing D-Class subject. The D-Class subject died 4 minutes after initial access of the file from blood loss and oxygen deprivation. SCP-2085-A-4 sits in containment, laughing, while you sit there on your couch, dethroned, back where you started, having thought you tore SCP-2085 apart with your mind, only to learn that your efforts only reinforced it with more glue. Now go check out SCP-247, A Harmless Kitten, and SCP-577, Bullet Cat for more SCPs that'll melt or claw out a cat lover's heart.